Hey dreamers, tonight we step into the most tragic love story of the ancient world, the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, where music tried to outshine death and hope danced on the edge of heartbreak. You're about to discover why this myth has captivated hearts for over 2,000 years, and how one song could move gods, open the gates of the underworld, and change fate itself. But what made Orpheus's music so powerful that even Hades wept? Why did Eurydice vanish just as happiness seemed possible? And why did Orpheus risk everything to follow her into the depths? What choice shattered their destinies forever? And what secret lies in the final haunting note of their story? As you stand at the edge of an ancient olive grove in Thrace, morning mist clings to silver-green leaves like whispered secrets. The air carries wild thyme and rosemary, mixed with the distant salt tang of the Aegean Sea. This is where our journey begins, in a land where gods walk among mortals, and a single melody can stir the shadows or bring light to the lost. If these stories truly help you relax, feel free to leave a gentle like. If you'd like, you're welcome to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you now. Tonight, you're among fellow dreamers, listening for the notes that echo beyond the boundary of life and love. You're about to witness the birth of a legend, a young artist whose melodies could coax stones to weep, and whose lyre could tame even the wildest creatures. His name is Orpheus, son of Apollo, god of music and poetry, and Calliope, the most celebrated muse among those who spark art and wisdom. As you venture deeper into this sacred scene, everything around you feels changed by music itself. The air hums with an invisible melody, as though the earth holds its breath, quietly singing beneath your feet. Birds sit perfectly still, letting silence reign while a gentle wind passes through the branches overhead. The harmony is unmistakable, and you sense the presence of divinity woven through every living thing. You see him now, Orpheus, seated under a sprawling oak whose trunk would take 5 men to encircle, a living monument as ancient as time. He looks no older than 20, his beauty unmistakably otherworldly. You can't help but notice the way sunlight flickers across his hair, sometimes rendering it golden like Apollo's, and at other angles as dark and rich as midnight. His eyes are deep pools, reflecting not just the passing clouds but every song ever sung and every feeling ever felt. His hands cradle a lyre like nothing else in the world. Crafted by Hermes and gifted to Apollo, then passed lovingly to Orpheus, the instrument's wood seems to shift between olive, cedar, and a mysterious black grain from trees lost to history. Across its frame, 7 strings shimmer with the glow of moonlight and starlight, waiting to be awakened. Orpheus lets his fingers wander across the strings, producing music that doesn't yet become a song, but somehow stirs your heart with each crystalline note. In that moment, you understand why birds fall silent at his touch, why fierce lions become gentle, and why the trees themselves seem to lean closer, hungry for more. But the source of this power is not what you might think. It is not skill, nor is it merely divine blood. His music taps into a fundamental secret of the cosmos, a principle so powerful it can command both life and death. We will uncover this secret when he stands before Hades himself, because only then will the true, and terrifying, nature of his gift be revealed. Yet today, something in Orpheus's posture suggests a yearning. The way he gazes across the distant mountains, the subtle restlessness in his hands. For all his gifts and admiration, you sense the loneliness inside him, the ache of being both worshipped and misunderstood. Too mortal to fully belong among gods, and too touched by the divine to find kinship among ordinary humans. That is the paradox of his soul. As you watch, Orpheus suddenly glances up from his lyre and seems to meet your gaze, as though he recognizes you, his invisible witness in this ancient drama. When his voice breaks the silence, it carries the same aching beauty as the music he plays, every word echoing the longing that lives within his heart. There must be someone, he says to the morning air, someone who can hear not just the music I make, but the music that lives within my heart. Someone who can love not the God-touched musician, but simply me. His words hang in the air like incense, and you feel the truth of them resonate through your being. Here is perhaps the most gifted artist who has ever lived, capable of moving the very foundations of the earth with his songs, yet he yearns for the one thing his divine gifts cannot summon: true love freely given. As if in answer to his prayer, a sound drifts through the grove that makes even Orpheus straighten with attention. It's laughter, not the tittering of nervous mortals or the calculated mirth of the gods, but genuine, joyful laughter that bubbles up like water from a pure spring. The sound seems to dance through the olive trees, growing closer with each musical note. You turn toward the sound and see her approaching through the dappled shadows. Even before you know her name, you understand that you're looking at someone extraordinary. This is Eurydice, the most beautiful of all the tree nymphs, the dryads who are born from the trees themselves and live as long as their parent oaks and olives and pines. Eurydice moves through the grove with a grace that makes it seem as though her feet barely touch the earth. Her skin has the warm golden tone of honey in sunlight, and her hair flows behind her like liquid amber. She wears a simple dress woven from silk that seems to have been spun by the very spiders of the forest, changing colour as she moves, now green as new leaves, now brown as rich earth, now the silver grey of olive bark. But it is her eyes that capture your attention most completely. They hold depths of kindness and wisdom that speak of centuries spent in communion with growing things. Yet there is also something playful and curious about her gaze, a mischievous intelligence that suggests she finds joy in the simple act of being alive. She's chasing butterflies, great magnificent creatures with wings like stained glass windows that dance just beyond her reach. Each time she thinks she has caught one, it flutters away with what sounds remarkably like tiny laughter of its own. Eurydice doesn't seem frustrated by this game. Instead, she appears to be enjoying every moment of the chase, her laughter ringing out each time a butterfly escapes her gentle grasp. You watch, enchanted, as she spins and reaches and stumbles slightly in her pursuit of these ethereal creatures. There's something so alive about her, so completely present in this moment, that it makes your heart lift just to observe her joy. Orpheus, too, has become completely still, his lyre forgotten in his lap as he watches this vision of pure happiness dance through his grove. You can see the exact moment when his world changes forever, the moment when his eyes first truly see Eurydice and his heart recognizes its other half. The butterflies suddenly abandon their game and flutter higher into the canopy, as if they have accomplished some secret mission. Eurydice, left standing alone in a shaft of golden sunlight, finally notices that she is no longer alone in the grove. Her eyes meet those of Orpheus, and the very air between them seems to shimmer with possibility. For a long moment neither speaks. The silence stretches, but it is not uncomfortable. Rather, it feels full of potential, like the pause before the first note of a magnificent symphony. "I was chasing butterflies," Eurydice says finally, and her voice is like music itself, though entirely different from Orpheus's divine tones. Where his voice carries the power of his godly heritage, hers holds the warmth of earth and growing things, the comfort of seasons turning and life constantly renewing itself. "I saw," Orpheus replies, and you notice that for perhaps the first time in his immortal life, he sounds almost shy. "They led you here?" Eurydice tilts her head, studying him with those warm, intelligent eyes. "Did they? Or perhaps they led you here instead?" It's a simple exchange, but you can feel the weight of destiny in these first words between them. There's something different about the way they look at each other, as if they are seeing not just who the other is now, but who they might become together. "May I ask your name?" Orpheus sets his lyre aside carefully, giving her his full attention in a way that makes the gesture feel like a gift. "I am Eurydice," she says, and the name sounds like a prayer on her lips. "I live in the great oak at the heart of this grove. She is my mother tree, and I am her daughter in all the ways that matter." "Eurydice," Orpheus repeats, and somehow when he says her name it becomes a melody. "I am Orpheus," she finishes for him, and now she does smile, an expression so radiant it seems to make the very sunlight brighter. "Everyone knows who you are. Your music travels farther than the wind itself." But instead of the worship or awe that usually greets this recognition, Eurydice's tone holds only gentle warmth. She doesn't seem intimidated by his divine heritage or overwhelmed by his legendary gifts. She simply sees him, the person beneath the reputation, the lonely young man yearning for connection. "But do you know who I am when I'm not playing music?" Orpheus asks, and you can hear the vulnerability in his question. It's clear that no one has ever cared to know him as anything other than the god-touched musician. Eurydice considers this seriously, as if it's the most important question she's ever been asked. I think, she says slowly, that you are someone who understands that the most beautiful music isn't always the loudest. Someone who knows that sometimes the most powerful song is the one that speaks directly to a single heart. The accuracy of her perception takes Orpheus's breath away. In a few simple words, she has seen through to the core of who he really is, not just a performer of grand divine melodies, but an artist who yearns for intimate connection, for music that bridges the gap between souls. "Would you like to hear something I'd never played for anyone else?" he asks, reaching for his lyre with hands that tremble slightly with nervous anticipation. Eurydice settles herself gracefully on a moss-covered stone, arranging her silk dress around her like flower petals. "I would be honored," she says simply. What follows is unlike any music Orpheus has ever created. Instead of the sweeping, grand compositions that can move mountains and tame wild beasts, he plays something soft and intimate, a melody that sounds like a conversation between two hearts learning to trust each other. The notes dance between them like the butterflies that brought Eurydice to this moment, sometimes playful, sometimes tender, always beautiful. You watch Eurydice's face as she listens and see something magical happening. Her expression doesn't show the stunned awe that usually greets Orpheus's music. Instead, she listens with the deep attention of someone who truly hears not just the notes, but the emotions behind them. Occasionally, she nods slightly, as if agreeing with something the music is saying to her heart. When the song ends, the silence that follows feels sacred. Eurydice doesn't immediately burst into praise or appreciation. Instead, she sits quietly for a moment, as if allowing the music to settle into her soul before responding. "That was beautiful," she says finally. "But more than that, it was honest. Thank you for sharing something so personal with me." And in that moment, you see Orpheus fall completely, irrevocably in love. Not with Eurydice's beauty, though she is certainly beautiful, but with her ability to truly hear him. For the first time in his life, someone has listened to his music and responded to the heart behind it rather than the power it displays. The courtship that follows unfolds like the slow opening of a perfect flower. Day after day, Orpheus returns to the olive grove, and day after day, Eurydice meets him there. Sometimes he plays for her, not the grand, earth-shaking compositions that have made him famous, but intimate melodies that speak of growing affection, of hope, of dreams they're beginning to share. Other times, they simply talk. Eurydice tells him about life as a tree nymph, about the deep, slow wisdom of the oaks and the quick gossip of the birches, about the way each season brings its own gifts and challenges. She explains how she can feel the health of the entire forest through her connection to her mother tree, how she knows when rain is coming 3 days before the first clouds appear, how she can sense the emotions of every creature that shelters beneath her branches. Orpheus, in turn, shares stories of his divine heritage, but not the grand tales of power and glory that most would expect. Instead, he tells her about the loneliness of being neither fully God nor fully mortal, about his struggles to create music that satisfies his soul rather than simply impressing his audience, about his dreams of finding someone who can love all parts of him, mortal and divine alike. You follow them on long walks through the countryside, watching as their friendship deepens into something more profound. Orpheus shows Eurydice hidden places where his music has left its mark. A circle of stones that still hum with ancient melodies, a waterfall where his songs have taught the water new rhythms, a meadow where flowers bloom in harmonious patterns because of lullabies he once sang there. Eurydice, in return, introduces him to the secret life of growing things. She teaches him to hear the whispered conversations of leaves in the wind, to recognize the different calls that trees use to warn each other of danger, to understand the complex relationships between all the creatures that make the forest their home. Under her gentle guidance, Orpheus begins to see his music not just as performance or power, but as one voice in the vast symphony of the natural world. What strikes you most about their growing love is how it makes both of them more themselves rather than less. Eurydice's natural wisdom blooms even more brightly in response to Orpheus's appreciation for her insights. Her laughter comes more frequently, her eyes sparkle with shared jokes and tender observations. She seems to grow more beautiful each day, not because she's changing, but because love is helping her express her truest self. Orpheus, meanwhile, becomes more grounded, more present in each moment. The restless yearning that once drove him to wander constantly settles into contentment with wherever Eurydice happens to be. His music, too, undergoes a transformation. While he retains all his divine power, his compositions become more nuanced, more emotionally complex. Love is teaching him new melodies, new harmonies he never could have discovered on his own. Honestly, have you ever witnessed a love story that felt this genuine and deep? For me, it has to be this one between Orpheus and Eurydice. There's something about the way they truly see each other that makes every other romance pale in comparison. The seasons turn as their love grows, and you watch them discover the rhythms of life together. In spring, they wander through meadows carpeted with wildflowers, Orpheus composing songs inspired by the riot of colors, while Eurydice teaches him the names and properties of every bloom. In summer, they find cool shade beneath her mother oak, sharing lazy afternoons where Orpheus plays gentle melodies while Eurydice weaves flower crowns that somehow never wilt when she places them on his head. Autumn brings its own magic as Eurydice shows Orpheus how to read the forest's preparations for winter. Together, they watch the leaves turn from green to gold to crimson, and Orpheus composes his first song about endings that are also beginnings, about death that makes new life possible. It's a melody that speaks of cycles and seasons, of love that grows stronger rather than dimmer with the passage of time. Winter finds them creating their own warmth, huddled together in the hollow of Eurydice's mother tree while snow blankets the forest floor. These are perhaps their most precious hours, moments when the rest of the world sleeps and they have only each other for company. Orpheus plays softly, his music barely louder than a whisper, while Eurydice tells him stories her tree mother has shared from centuries of watching the world change around her. It is during one of these intimate winter evenings that Orpheus makes his decision. He has been carrying it in his heart for months now, this certainty that Eurydice is not just his beloved, but his destiny, his other half, the completion of everything he was meant to become. "Eurydice," he says, setting aside his lyre and taking her hands in his. Even in the dim light filtering through the hollow tree, you can see how his own hands tremble with nervous excitement. "Yes," she responds, and though her tone remains calm, you notice how her fingers tighten around his. "I have traveled across much of the world," Orpheus begins, his voice carrying all the music of his heart. "I have seen wonders that would take lifetimes to describe and met beings of power beyond mortal understanding. But in all my wanderings, through all the marvels I have witnessed, I have never found anything more beautiful or precious than this. Than you, than us, than what we create together." Eurydice's eyes never leave his face as he speaks, and you can see her love for him shining there like sunlight through leaves. "I want to wake up each morning knowing that I will see your smile before the day ends," he continues. "I want to face whatever challenges the fates may send, knowing that your wisdom and strength support me. I want to create music with you, not just as my audience, but as my partner, my inspiration, my home." He pauses, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable than you have ever seen him. "Eurydice, will you consent to be my wife? Will you bind your life to mine, your fate to mine, your future to mine?" The silence that follows feels eternal, though it lasts only heartbeats. Then Eurydice's face transforms with a joy so radiant it seems to light up the entire hollow of the tree. "Yes," she whispers, and then louder, with a laugh that sounds like silver bells in morning air. "Yes, Orpheus, yes, with all my heart and soul and everything I am or ever hope to become." When they kiss, you feel as if you're witnessing the birth of something entirely new in the world, not just the joining of two people, but the creation of a love so pure and complete that it adds new music to the spheres themselves. The very air around them seems to sparkle with golden light, and you realize that even the gods themselves are taking notice of this perfect union. The preparations for their wedding consume the following months, though they are preparations unlike any the world has ever seen. This is not merely a mortal ceremony, but the joining of a son of Apollo with a daughter of the ancient earth itself. Divine and mortal realms must both acknowledge and celebrate this union. Apollo himself descends from Olympus to meet his future daughter-in-law, arriving in a chariot pulled by horses made of living flame. You watch nervously as the god of music and poetry approaches Eurydice, knowing that his approval could determine the very feasibility of their marriage. But Apollo's stern expression softens the moment he hears Eurydice speak. She greets him with perfect respect but no trace of fear, addressing him as the father of her beloved rather than as the terrible Olympian deity he could choose to be. "Lord Apollo," she says, offering a graceful bow, "I am honored to meet Orpheus's father. He has told me so much about you, especially about how you taught him that true music comes from the heart rather than from technique alone." Apollo's eyebrows rise in surprise. Most mortals who meet him either cower in terror or immediately begin begging for favors. Eurydice simply treats him as what he is to her, the father of the man she loves. "Has he indeed?" Apollo muses, studying this remarkable tree nymph who has captured his son's heart so completely. "And what has he told you of the responsibilities that come with loving one who carries divine blood?" "He has been honest about the challenges," Eurydice replies steadily. "But love isn't about choosing the easiest path. It's about choosing the person whose hand you want to hold while walking whatever path unfolds before you." Apollo stares at her for a long moment, then throws back his head and laughs, a sound like sunlight made audible. "By Zeus's beard, I see why my son is so completely enchanted." "Very well, daughter," and the word daughter carries real warmth. "You had my blessing and my protection. May your love prove as enduring as the music you inspire." The wedding celebration that follows becomes the stuff of legend itself. Representatives from every realm gather to witness this unprecedented union. The Muses, Orpheus's divine aunts, weave a wedding song that makes grown gods weep with its beauty. Dionysus provides wine that tastes like concentrated joy, while Demeter ensures that every flower in Greece blooms simultaneously in honor of the bride. The tree nymphs create a wedding dress for Eurydice that seems woven from moonbeams and morning dew, changing colors with her emotions, silver when she's calm, gold when she laughs, deep green when she looks at Orpheus with love-filled eyes. The river nymphs contribute a crown of water lilies that never wilt, while their cousins from the mountains bring jewels that sparkle like captured starlight. But perhaps the most meaningful gift comes from Eurydice's mother tree herself. The ancient oak, which has stood silent for over 1,000 years, speaks for the first and only time in recorded history. "My daughter," the oak's voice resonates through both wood and air, reaching every guest at the celebration. "You were born from my heartwood and nurtured by my sap. You have been my joy and my pride through all your years. Now I release you to follow your own path, to grow in ways I never could have imagined. Take with you my love, my wisdom, and my blessing. Though you leave my branches, you will always be my child." There's not a dry eye among the assembled guests as Eurydice kneels and places her hand on her mother tree's bark one final time as an unmarried daughter. The ceremony itself takes place at sunset, in a circle of standing stones older than memory. Orpheus and Eurydice face each other as Apollo himself performs the rites that will bind them together, not just for this life, but for all eternity. When they exchange vows, Orpheus sings his promises rather than speaking them. His voice carries all the love in his heart, all his hopes for their future, all his commitment to cherishing and protecting this precious gift he has been given. The melody he creates is so beautiful that flowers begin sprouting from the stone circle itself, and stars appear in the still bright sky to listen. Eurydice responds by speaking vows that sound like poetry even without Orpheus's divine music to enhance them. She promises to be his anchor when divine duties call him to wander, his peace when the chaos of immortal politics threatens to overwhelm him, his truth when the world tries to make him into something he is not. When Apollo declares them husband and wife, their kiss creates a pulse of golden light that ripples outward from the stone circle, touching every corner of Greece. For one perfect moment, every creature in the land, human and animal, mortal and divine, feels the echo of their pure love and finds themselves smiling for reasons they cannot name. The celebration continues long into the night with music and dancing and feasting that would be remembered in songs for generations to come. But eventually, even the most dedicated revelers begin to drift away until only Orpheus and Eurydice remain in the circle of stones, holding each other close as the first light of dawn begins to paint the eastern sky. "Are you ready for our adventure to begin?" Orpheus asks, his arms wrapped around his wife as they watch the sun rise on their first day as a married couple. "With you," Eurydice replies, snuggling deeper into his embrace, "I'm ready for anything." And so begins the happiest period in the lives of both Orpheus and Eurydice. Their love, already deep and true, grows even stronger within the bonds of marriage. They create a home together in a grove at the foot of Mount Rhodope, where Eurydice's connection to growing things and Orpheus's divine gifts combine to create a paradise like nothing else on earth. The trees in their grove grow taller and more beautiful than anywhere else, their branches intertwining in natural arches that seem designed by the gods themselves. The flowers bloom more vibrantly, their colors richer and their fragrances sweeter. Even the animals are different here, more trusting, more peaceful, as if the love between Orpheus and Eurydice has taught them that this is a place where no harm will come to any living thing. Their daily life settles into rhythms as natural as breathing. Each morning, Eurydice tends to her gardens while Orpheus composes new melodies inspired by her movements, her laughter, the way sunlight catches in her hair. The vegetables she grows are the sweetest anyone has ever tasted, while the herbs she cultivates have healing properties beyond anything known to mortal medicine. In the afternoons, they often walk together through the countryside, Orpheus playing soft melodies that make their journey feel like a dance. Everywhere they go, the land responds to their presence. Crops grow more abundantly in fields they pass, sick animals recover their health, and even the weather seems to bend in their favor, bringing gentle rain when needed and sunshine when the world grows too dark. But it is in the evenings that their love finds its truest expression. As the sun sets and the first stars appear, they sit together in their favorite spot, a natural amphitheater formed by 7 ancient oak trees. Here, Orpheus plays while Eurydice listens with the deep attention that first captured his heart. Sometimes she sings along, her voice blending with his in harmonies that seem to make the very air sparkle with joy. These are the songs that become the foundation of all love ballads that will ever be written. Music that speaks of the way love makes ordinary moments sacred, of how finding your true partner transforms even the simplest tasks into celebrations. Orpheus composes melodies about the way Eurydice hums while she works in her garden, about the graceful gestures she makes when explaining something she finds fascinating, about the warmth in her eyes when she looks at him each morning as if seeing him for the first time. The gods themselves begin to seek out these evening concerts. Apollo visits regularly, bringing with him whichever of the muses happen to be free, all of them drawn by music that somehow surpasses even their own divine artistry. The difference, they realize, is that Orpheus is no longer creating music for its own sake, but as an expression of perfect love, and love, it turns out, is the most powerful creative force in existence. Other immortals follow suit. Artemis, usually too focused on her hunt to spare time for music, finds herself sitting motionless for hours listening to Orpheus sing about the way Eurydice moves through the forest like a deer who has never known fear. Athena, goddess of wisdom, discovers new insights in songs about the quiet intelligence Eurydice brings to every conversation. Even Ares, god of war, is gentled by melodies that speak of the strength found in choosing love over conquest. But perhaps the most frequent visitor is Aphrodite herself, goddess of love and beauty. She comes not to bask in worship or to claim credit for their romance, but simply to witness love in its purest form. After one particularly beautiful evening concert, she approaches the couple with tears of joy glittering in her divine eyes. "In all my eons," she tells them, "I have inspired countless loves, blessed innumerable marriages, overseen more romances than there are stars in the sky. But never, never have I seen two people love each other as completely and selflessly as you do. You have shown me what I have been trying to create all along." Her blessing ensures that their love will never diminish, never sour, never fade into comfortable routine. Each day, Orpheus and Eurydice discover new reasons to love each other, new depths to explore together, new ways to create beauty in the world around them. Their happiness becomes legendary throughout Greece. Poets travel from distant cities just to glimpse them together, hoping to understand the secret of perfect love. Young couples pray to whatever gods will listen, asking to be blessed with even a fraction of what Orpheus and Eurydice share. Parents tell their children stories about the musician and the tree nymph, who proved that true love is not just a fantasy from ancient tales, but something real and achievable for those brave enough to love without reservation. You follow them through season after season of this blessed existence, watching their love deepen and mature without ever losing its initial magic. They face the small challenges that come to every couple: differences of opinion, moments of miscommunication, the occasional frustration that arises when two independent souls learn to move through life as a unit. But they meet each challenge with the same commitment to understanding and supporting each other that marked their courtship. When they disagree, they talk through their differences with patience and genuine curiosity about each other's perspectives. When misunderstandings arise, they work to clarify rather than defend, always remembering that they are on the same side, working toward the same goal of a life built together. When frustration threatens to create distance between them, they choose vulnerability over pride, sharing their fears and insecurities rather than hiding behind walls of self-protection. Their love becomes not just a feeling, but a practice, a daily choice to choose each other, to prioritize their partnership, to create something together that neither could achieve alone. And with each passing day, that choice becomes easier, more natural, until loving each other is as effortless as breathing. But the fates, those three ancient sisters who spin the threads of destiny for gods and mortals alike, are not content to let any story remain forever bright. They have been watching Orpheus and Eurydice with growing concern, for their love has become so perfect that it threatens to upset the delicate balance between joy and sorrow that gives life its meaning. "Something must be done," Clotho murmurs as she spins new threads of destiny. Their happiness is beginning to make others dissatisfied with more ordinary love. Mortals are starting to believe that anything less than perfect bliss is unworthy of their commitment. "Indeed," agrees Lachesis, who measures the length of each life, "and the gods themselves grow restless. How can they command worship and sacrifice when mortals can look to Orpheus and Eurydice as examples of love that needs no divine intervention to flourish?" Atropos, eldest of the three and wielder of the shears that cut every thread when its time has come, nods grimly. Balance must be restored. Perfect happiness cannot exist without its opposite, or it ceases to be recognizable as happiness at all. And so the fates begin to weave complications into the golden thread of Orpheus and Eurydice's story. At first, these are small things: a favorite flower that fails to bloom in Eurydice's garden, a string on Orpheus's lyre that breaks during a particularly moving song. But gradually, the shadows begin to lengthen. It starts with dreams. Eurydice begins waking in the middle of the night from nightmares she cannot quite remember, clutching Orpheus's hand as if afraid he might vanish. Orpheus, meanwhile, finds himself composing songs that carry undertones of sadness, even when he tries to create music of pure joy, as if some part of him senses darkness approaching on the horizon. They do not speak of these troubling signs, not wanting to darken their partner's happiness with their own unexplained anxieties. This silence, born of love and the desire to protect each other, becomes the first small crack in their perfect communication. Neither realizes that sharing their fears would have halved them, while keeping them secret allows the fears to grow in the dark corners of their hearts. The signs escalate slowly. Animals that once flocked to their grove begin to avoid it, as if sensing something the human inhabitants cannot perceive. The flowers in Eurydice's garden, while still beautiful, begin to bloom out of season. Spring bulbs appearing in autumn, summer roses blooming beneath winter snow. These impossible flowers are lovely, but their very existence suggests that the natural order is somehow becoming unstable. Orpheus's music, too, begins to change in ways that trouble him. No matter how hard he tries to compose songs of celebration and joy, minor keys creep into his melodies. His lyre sometimes produces notes he did not intend to play, harmonies that speak of loss and longing rather than contentment and love. When he mentions this to Eurydice, she reassures him that his music is as beautiful as ever, but he notices that she too seems subtly affected by these darker tones, growing pensive and distant after his evening concerts. Still, their love remains strong. If anything, the sense of some approaching change makes them more precious to each other, more aware of how fortunate they are to have found perfect partnership in an imperfect world. They spend more time together, take longer walks, linger over conversations that might once have been brief. Without discussing it explicitly, both seem determined to store up as many happy memories as possible, like squirrels gathering nuts against a hard winter they sense but cannot name. It is on one of these extended walks, during the height of summer when the world should have been at its most peaceful and abundant, that destiny finally shows its hand. They are exploring a part of the countryside they have never visited before, drawn by reports of a meadow where rare flowers bloom in patterns that supposedly tell the future to those wise enough to read them. The day is perfect for such an adventure, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carries the mingled scents of wild flowers and distant rain. Eurydice walks slightly ahead, following a deer path that winds between ancient olive trees whose silver-green leaves create shifting patterns of light and shadow. She moves with her characteristic grace, occasionally stopping to examine an interesting plant or to point out a particularly beautiful view to Orpheus, who follows a few steps behind, his lyre slung across his shoulder and a melody humming in his throat. "Look!" Eurydice calls, her voice filled with delight. "I think we've found our meadow." Through a gap in the trees you can see what has captured her attention, a wide expanse of grassland dotted with flowers in colours so vivid they seem to have been painted by the gods themselves. Blues deeper than sapphires grow beside yellows bright as captured sunlight, while purples and reds create swirling patterns that do indeed seem to tell stories to those who know how to listen. Eurydice steps out of the tree line and into the full sunlight of the meadow, her face turned upward to catch the warmth on her cheeks. She looks so beautiful in this moment, so perfectly herself, that Orpheus stops walking just to watch her, his heart swelling with love so intense it almost hurts. Which is why, when tragedy strikes, he is too far away to help. Eurydice takes another step forward, her attention focused on a cluster of particularly intriguing flowers near the center of the meadow. She does not notice the old stone half buried in the grass, its surface worn smooth by centuries of weather until it is nearly invisible against the earth. Her foot catches the edge of this hidden obstacle, and she stumbles forward, arms windmilling as she tries to regain her balance. Under ordinary circumstances, Eurydice would have recovered easily. She has the natural grace of her tree nymph heritage, the sure-footedness of one who has spent centuries moving through forest and field. But these are not ordinary circumstances. The fates have been busy with their weaving, and at this crucial moment another tragedy intersects with hers. A viper has been sleeping in the warm grass near the flower cluster, a serpent whose venom is so potent that it can kill even the immortal children of the gods. The snake has been dreaming peacefully in the summer heat, with no intention of harm to anyone, but when Eurydice falls, her hand lands directly on the creature's coiled body. The viper, startled from sleep and acting purely on instinct, strikes before it can recognize that the hand touching it belongs to someone who means no harm. Its fangs sink into the soft flesh of Eurydice's palm, injecting venom that begins spreading through her system immediately. The sound Eurydice makes is not quite a scream, not quite a gasp, but something between the two, a sound of such surprised pain that it seems to tear through the very fabric of the peaceful afternoon. The viper, immediately realizing its mistake, slithers away with what almost sounds like an apologetic hiss, but the damage is already done. Eurydice! Orpheus's anguished cry splits the air as he races toward his wife, his lyre falling forgotten to the ground. He reaches her in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her crumpled form, his hands hovering over her uncertainly as he tries to understand what has happened. Eurydice lies on her side among the prophetic flowers, her face already pale and her breathing labored. The hand where the snake bit her is beginning to swell, dark lines of poison spreading up her arm like deadly ivy climbing a wall. "The snake," she whispers, her voice already weaker than it should be. "I didn't see. It was sleeping and I frightened it." Even in her pain, Eurydice's first instinct is to excuse the creature that harmed her, to recognize that this was accident rather than malice. But Orpheus is beyond such philosophical considerations. His world has just shifted on its axis, transforming in an instant from paradise to nightmare. "Hold on," he tells her, gathering her into his arms with infinite gentleness. "Just hold on, my love. I'll get help. Apollo will know what to do, or Artemis, or—" But even as he speaks, you can see the truth written in Eurydice's failing strength. The venom is moving too quickly, spreading through her immortal body with supernatural speed. This is no ordinary snake bite, but something crafted by fate itself to be beyond the power of healing. Eurydice knows it too. Despite her pain, her eyes remain clear and focused on Orpheus's face. "My love," she says, her voice growing fainter with each word, "listen to me. This is not your fault. This is not anyone's fault. Sometimes terrible things happen to people who don't deserve them, and the only thing we can do is love each other through whatever time we have." "Don't talk like that," Orpheus pleads, his voice breaking as tears stream down his face. "Don't talk like you're going anywhere. I won't let you go. Do you hear me? I won't let you leave me." Eurydice lifts her uninjured hand to touch his cheek, her fingers trembling with the effort. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," she whispers. "These years with you. They were worth everything, worth this pain, worth the fear, worth whatever comes next. Love like ours doesn't end just because one of us has to go ahead to whatever waits beyond." "Eurydice, please." Orpheus's voice cracks completely, and you feel your own heart breaking as you watch the strongest, most gifted being you've ever known reduced to helpless desperation by the prospect of losing his beloved. "Promise me something," she continues, her words coming in shorter and shorter breaths. "Promise me you'll keep making music. Promise me you'll remember that love like ours is supposed to be celebrated, not mourned. Promise me you'll find reasons to smile again, even if it takes a very long time." "I can't promise that," Orpheus sobs. "I can't imagine smiling without you. I can't imagine music without you there to hear it. I can't imagine anything without you." "Then promise me you'll try," Eurydice says, and somehow she manages to smile, an expression so full of love that it seems to light up her fading face. "Promise me that when you think of me, you'll remember the joy we shared, not just the sadness of this moment." Orpheus clutches her closer, as if he can somehow hold her soul in her body through the sheer force of his need for her. "I promise," he whispers, though the words feel like they're being torn from his chest. "I promise I'll try." Eurydice's smile grows a little brighter. "Good," she breathes. That's all anyone can do. Try to honor the love we've been given, even when—" Her voice trails off, and for a moment you think she has simply lost the strength to continue speaking. But then you realize that her chest is no longer rising and falling, that her hand has grown still against Orpheus's cheek, that the light in her eyes has faded like sunset, disappearing behind distant mountains. Eurydice is gone. The silence that follows is not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful afternoon, but the terrible absence of sound that comes when something essential has been torn from the world. Even the flowers around them seem to bend their heads in mourning, their bright colours somehow dimmed by the enormity of what has just occurred. Orpheus sits motionless for a long time, holding his wife's lifeless body and staring at her face as if he expects her to wake up and tell him this has all been a cruel joke. His mind cannot process the reality of what has happened. Just moments ago, they were walking together toward adventure, laughing at something she had said, planning where they might explore next. How can she be gone? How can someone so alive, so vibrant, so essential, simply not exist anymore? When the reality finally penetrates his shock, the sound that emerges from Orpheus's throat is barely human. It's a cry of such anguish that it seems to shake the very foundations of the earth. Birds fall silent for miles in every direction. Animals flee to their burrows and dens. Even the wind stops blowing, as if nature itself is too stunned by this outpouring of grief to continue its normal patterns. But more than anything else, it's the music that stops. For the first time since his birth, Orpheus exists in a world without melody, without harmony, without song. The divine gift that has defined his entire existence seems to have died with Eurydice, leaving behind only crushing silence and pain beyond measurement. He carries her body home to their grove, moving like a man in a nightmare from which he cannot wake. The trees that once arched joyfully overhead now seem to loom menacingly, their branches reaching toward him like grasping fingers. The flowers in Eurydice's garden have already begun to wilt, as if they sense that their tender caretaker will never return to nurture them. Word of the tragedy spreads swiftly through both mortal and divine realms. Apollo arrives first, his golden chariot creating trails of fire across the sky in his haste to reach his grieving son. But even the god of healing and prophecy can do nothing for Eurydice now. Death has claimed her completely, and not even divine power can undo what the fates have decreed. The funeral that follows becomes a ceremony of mourning unlike anything the world has ever witnessed. Immortals who have never shed tears weep openly for the loss of such perfect love. The 9 muses sing a dirge so beautiful and heartbreaking that it causes flowers to bloom and wither simultaneously, creating carpets of beauty and decay that mirror the joy and sorrow of Eurydice's too brief life. But Orpheus himself remains silent throughout the entire ceremony. He does not play his lyre, does not sing, does not even speak. He stands beside Eurydice's funeral pyre like a statue carved from grief itself, his eyes fixed on her face as if he can memorize every detail before the flames claim her forever. When they light the fire burns with colors never seen before. Golds and silvers and deep greens that speak of growing things and earth magic. But Orpheus watches it all with empty eyes, feeling as if the fire is consuming not just Eurydice's body, but every hope and dream and plan they had shared for the future. After the other mourners have departed, leaving offerings of flowers and songs and tears, Orpheus remains alone beside the cooling ashes. Night falls and morning comes, but still he does not move. He cannot imagine returning to their home without her, cannot bear the thought of sleeping in a bed that will never again know her warmth, cannot face the prospect of waking up to a world that no longer contains the person who gave it meaning. Have you ever lost someone whose absence left such a profound emptiness that the very air felt thinner? For me, it has to be the moment when you realize that grief isn't just sadness, it's the complete reorganization of everything you thought you knew about life. Days pass in this manner, with Orpheus existing in a state somewhere between life and death himself. He takes no food, drinks no water, speaks to no one who attempts to offer comfort. Several times, his father Apollo tries to rouse him from his stupor, but Orpheus merely stares through him as if he is not there. It is only when Orpheus begins to waste away from lack of sustenance that something stirs within him, not hope exactly, but a kind of desperate determination. If the living world no longer holds his beloved, then perhaps the realm of the dead might prove more accommodating. If Eurydice has been taken from him by death, then perhaps death itself might be persuaded to give her back. The idea, once it takes root in his mind, grows with startling speed. He is Orpheus, son of Apollo, gifted with power over all living things through his music. If his songs can move stones to tears and make wild beasts lie down in peace, surely they might also move the rulers of the underworld to pity and compassion. For the first time since Eurydice's death, Orpheus picks up his lyre. The strings feel strange under his fingers after days of silence, and the first notes he produces are harsh and discordant. But gradually, as his determination crystallizes into resolve, the music begins to flow again, not the joyful melodies of his happy years with Eurydice, but something entirely new. This is music born of loss and longing, of love that refuses to accept defeat, of hope that persists even in the face of impossible odds. He begins with a simple melody, a song that tells the story of his love for Eurydice, how they met, how their affection grew, how perfectly suited they were to each other. But as the music develops, it transforms into something more, a hymn to love itself, to the way true partnership makes both people more than they could ever be alone, to the injustice of such love being cut short by random tragedy. The song grows in power and complexity as Orpheus pours all his grief and desperate hope into its notes. It becomes not just music, but a kind of prayer, a plea addressed to whatever powers might be listening, asking for the chance to make his case before the throne of Hades himself. As the melody reaches its climax, something extraordinary happens. The ground beneath Orpheus's feet begins to tremble, and a crack appears in the earth, narrow at first, but widening as his music continues. You realize that his song is so powerful, so filled with genuine anguish and love, that it is literally opening a doorway to the underworld. Without hesitation, Orpheus steps toward the fissure in the earth. The crack widens further, revealing stone steps descending into darkness deeper than any mortal night. Cold air rises from the depths, carrying scents of underground rivers and ancient stone, along with something else, the indescribable essence of death itself. Most mortals would flee from such a portal, terrified by the prospect of entering the realm from which no living soul has ever returned. But Orpheus feels no fear, only determination burning in his chest like a second heart. If Eurydice is down there in that darkness, then darkness is where he needs to be. Still playing his lyre, he begins his descent into the underworld, the music that flows from his fingers serving as both light and guide through the increasingly Stygian gloom. Each note seems to create its own small illumination, pushing back the shadows just enough to reveal the next step, the next turn in the path that spirals ever downward toward the kingdom of the dead. The journey through the upper levels of the underworld proves less treacherous than expected, largely because Orpheus's music precedes him like a herald announcing the arrival of someone who must be taken seriously. Creatures that would normally attack any living intruder instead pause to listen, their savage nature temporarily gentled by melodies that speak of love rather than conquest. Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the entrance to Hades' realm proper, represents Orpheus's first real challenge. Each of the beast's heads is larger than a horse, with teeth like curved daggers and eyes that burn with hellfire. The creature has never allowed a living soul to pass, and its first instinct upon seeing Orpheus is to charge with jaws gaping wide. But Orpheus simply stands his ground and plays. The melody he chooses is one he once composed for Eurydice, about a lonely dog they befriended during their wanderings, a song about the way even the most fearsome creatures yearn for companionship and understanding. As the notes wash over Cerberus, all three heads gradually slow their attack, then stop entirely, then finally lower to the ground in what looks remarkably like submission. One of the heads, the one in the middle, actually begins to whimper softly, as if Orpheus's music has reminded it of some long-forgotten capacity for gentleness. The musician steps carefully around the temporarily pacified guardian, continuing to play until he is safely past, then gradually letting the song fade as he moves deeper into the realm of shadows. The landscape of the underworld unfolds before him like a dream constructed from humanity's deepest fears and oldest sorrows. Rivers of fire wind between hills of ash and bone, while overhead hangs a sky the color of old blood, lit by no sun or moon, but by the faint phosphorescence of decay itself. The air tastes of copper and bitter herbs, and every breath seems to carry whispers of the countless souls who have passed this way before. Yet Orpheus moves through this nightmare landscape with steady purpose, his music transforming the very atmosphere around him. Where his songs touch them, the rivers of fire burn less fiercely, their flames shifting from angry red to warmer golds and oranges. The ash-covered hills sprout tiny flowers, pale things that bloom for only moments before withering, but whose brief beauty provides patches of hope in the endless grey desolation. Other denizens of the underworld emerge from caves and crevices to hear him pass. These are not the savage monsters he might have expected, but souls twisted by eons of punishment and despair. Some have forgotten their names, others their crimes, but all remember enough about life to recognize the music of perfect love when they hear it. A woman who has been condemned to carry water in a sieve for all eternity stops her futile labours and weeps as Orpheus's music reminds her of the daughter she lost to plague so many centuries ago. A man bound to a wheel of fire ceases his struggles as melodies of forgiveness wash over him, giving him the first moment of peace he has known since his punishment began. Even the Furies, those terrible goddesses of vengeance whose very presence can drive mortals mad, pause in their eternal hunt for wrongdoers to listen to songs that speak of love so pure it makes their desire for justice seem petty by comparison. For the first time in their immortal existence, they find themselves wondering whether mercy might sometimes be more appropriate than punishment. But it is when Orpheus reaches the throne room of Hades himself that his music faces its ultimate test. The hall stretches before him vast as a cathedral, its walls carved from black stone that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. Torches burn with cold flames that provide illumination without warmth, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. Upon twin thrones at the far end of this chamber sit the rulers of the dead. Hades himself appears as a figure of terrible majesty, his skin pale as marble and his beard dark as the depths of the earth. His crown is wrought from metals that exist nowhere in the upper world, and his eyes hold the accumulated sorrow of every soul who has ever died. Beside him sits Persephone, queen of the underworld, beautiful beyond description but with a beauty touched by sadness. She was once as full of life as Eurydice, before Hades stole her from the world above to be his bride. Now she rules beside him with dignity and grace, but her eyes still sometimes look upward with longing for the spring meadows of her youth. Between the thrones and where Orpheus stands stretches a sea of the dead, countless souls who have been drawn by his music to witness this unprecedented audience. They press forward silently, their translucent forms creating shifting patterns like waves upon some ghostly ocean. Among them, Orpheus searches desperately for one beloved face, but the multitude is too vast and the eternal twilight too dim for him to distinguish individuals. "So," Hades speaks, his voice carrying the weight of mountains and the finality of winter, "a living man comes before me with demands. This has not happened in all the eons of my rule. Speak quickly, son of Apollo, for even divine blood grants you no special protection in my realm." Orpheus steps forward, his lyre still singing softly in his hands. When he speaks, his voice carries all the music of his heart, transforming even simple words into something approaching song. "Great Lord of the Dead," he begins, "mighty Hades, I come not with demands but with a plea born of love so deep that it has driven me to attempt what no living soul has dared before. I come to ask for the return of my wife, Eurydice, who was taken from life by cruel accident before her time." A murmur runs through the assembled dead at these words. Never has anyone asked for the return of a soul from Hades' keeping, and the very audacity of the request sends ripples of shock through the gathered multitudes. Hades' expression does not change, but Persephone leans forward slightly, her interest clearly piqued. She more than anyone understands the pain of separation from a beloved world, the ache of being torn away from everything that gave life meaning. "And what," Hades asks with dangerous quiet, "makes you think that love, even divine love, gives you the right to undo death itself? What makes your loss more significant than the millions who have gone before you?" It is the question Orpheus has been preparing for throughout his entire journey into this place. He raises his lyre and begins to play, but this is unlike any music he has ever created before. This is not performance or display of skill, but the pure expression of a heart laid completely bare. The melody tells the story of his love for Eurydice, but more than that, it tells the story of what love means, how it transforms not just the lovers, but everyone and everything it touches. His music speaks of morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, of hands held during evening walks, of the way Eurydice's laughter could make even ordinary moments feel sacred. But the song also encompasses loss, describing the hollow ache that lives where joy once resided, the way grief reshapes the very landscape of the soul. It speaks of nights when sleep brings no rest, of dawns that feel like mockery, of a world that continues spinning despite feeling like it should have stopped when something so precious was torn away. As Orpheus plays, something extraordinary happens throughout the throne room. The assembled dead, who have existed for eons in states of detachment from earthly emotions, find themselves remembering what it felt like to love and be loved. Tears begin to fall from eyes that have been dry since death claimed them. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of recognition, of remembering what made life worth living in the first place. The Furies, those implacable goddesses of justice, find their fierce expressions softening as the music reminds them of the loves they themselves knew in the days before they became divine instruments of vengeance. Tantalus, forever reaching for fruit that recedes from his grasp, stops his futile grasping and simply listens, his eternal hunger temporarily forgotten in the face of beauty that feeds the soul rather than the body. Even Hades himself is not unmoved. His granite features remain stern, but you notice his hands grip the arms of his throne more tightly, and something that might be recognition flickers in his dark eyes. He too knows what it means to love completely, to have found in another person the missing piece of himself. But it is Persephone who responds most deeply to Orpheus's plea. Tears stream openly down her face as his music awakens memories of her own abduction, her own separation from everything she held dear. She remembers the violation of being torn from her mother's arms, the terror of finding herself in this cold realm with no hope of return. She remembers too how Hades's love, genuine and deep, despite its origins in theft, eventually became something she could return, but never without the shadow of loss that colors everything in the underworld. When Orpheus finally allows his music to fade into silence, the throne room remains perfectly still for what seems like eternity. Then Persephone turns to her husband, her eyes still bright with tears. "My lord," she says softly, her voice carrying a plea of her own. Surely love such as this deserves consideration. Surely we, of all beings, understand the pain of lovers separated by forces beyond their control. Hades studies his wife's face, reading in her expression not just compassion for Orpheus, but perhaps a memory of her own lost innocence, her own severed connections to the world above. After a long moment, he turns his attention back to the young musician who has dared to enter his realm in pursuit of impossible love. Your music moves even stones to weep, Hades admits, his voice carrying a note of grudging respect. And your courage in coming here speaks of devotion that transcends mortal understanding. Very well, son of Apollo, I am prepared to consider your request. Hope flares in Orpheus's chest like a sudden flame, but Hades raises one hand to forestall celebration. However, the Lord of the Dead continues, nothing in creation comes without price, and the return of a soul from death demands a price higher than any ever paid. Are you prepared to hear my terms? Anything, Orpheus responds immediately. Name any price, accept any sacrifice, and I will meet it gladly. Be careful with such sweeping promises, Hades warns. The price I name may prove higher than your love can bear. But Orpheus stands straight and meets the god's terrible gaze without flinching. There is no price higher than my love can bear, he states with quiet conviction. Ask what you will. Hades nods slowly, as if this answer was exactly what he expected. Very well. I will return Eurydice to life, but with conditions that you must accept completely or not at all. I'm listening. First, Hades begins, she will follow you out of my realm, but you must not look back at her, must not turn to confirm that she walks behind you until you have both completely exited the underworld and stand once again beneath the sun. One glance backward before that moment, and she will be lost to you forever, not just until your own death, but for all eternity. The condition seems simple enough, almost too easy, and Orpheus nods his agreement. I accept. Second, Hades continues, you must make this journey in complete silence. You may not speak to her, may not call out encouragement or comfort, may not even hum a melody to ease the way. Any sound from your lips during the ascent, and she returns to me immediately. This condition is more difficult. Orpheus has lived his entire life through music, has never before been asked to exist in complete silence. But for Eurydice, he would willingly cut out his own tongue. I accept. And third, Hades says, his voice growing softer but somehow more ominous, you must understand that the Eurydice who follows you will not be quite the same as the one who died. Death changes all who pass through its gates, and she will carry shadows with her that were not there before. Can you love her still, knowing that your perfect happiness together can never be perfectly restored? This final condition gives Orpheus pause, but only briefly. Love, real love, means accepting the person you cherish as they are, not just as you wish they were. Whatever shadows death has added to Eurydice's soul, she will still be essentially herself, still the woman who saw him truly, still the partner whose hand he wants to hold while walking whatever path lies ahead. I accept, he says firmly, all conditions, completely and without reservation. Hades exchanges one more look with Persephone, who nods almost imperceptibly. Then the king of the dead raises his hand, and the assembled multitude of souls begins to part like a living sea, creating a clear pathway toward the back of the throne room. Through this corridor walks a figure that makes Orpheus's heart stop with joy so intense it physically hurts. Eurydice moves toward him with the same graceful steps he remembers, though there is something subtly different about her now. A translucent quality to her form, an ethereal beauty that speaks of existing between life and death. Her eyes, when they meet his, hold depths they did not possess in life. She has seen whatever lies beyond death, has experienced mysteries that no living soul can comprehend. But beneath these new depths, he recognizes the essential warmth that first drew him to her, the loving intelligence that made her his perfect partner. She stops just beyond arm's reach, close enough for him to see that she is real, that this is not some cruel illusion designed to torture him further. When she speaks, her voice carries new harmonies, as if she has learned songs from the spheres themselves. "My beloved," she says, and in those two words he hears all the love that death could not diminish. "You came for me." "Always," Orpheus whispers, forgetting for a moment the condition of silence. But Hades, perhaps moved by the reunion he has just witnessed, chooses not to enforce the rule quite yet. "The conditions begin now," the Lord of the Dead announces. "From this moment until you reach the surface world, you may not look back and you may not speak. Eurydice will follow, but her fate depends entirely on your faith and discipline. Go now, and may whatever gods watch over lovers grant you strength for the journey ahead." Orpheus nods his understanding, then turns toward the path that will lead them out of the underworld. Every instinct screams at him to take one last look at Eurydice, to reassure himself that she is truly there, that this miraculous reprieve is real. But he forces himself to focus forward, taking his first step on what will be the longest journey of his existence. Behind him he hears the soft whisper of footsteps that might be Eurydice following, but the sound is so faint he cannot be certain. The acoustics of the underworld are strange, distorting even the smallest sounds, and doubt begins to creep into his mind almost immediately. What if Hades is deceiving him? What if the footsteps belong to some other soul, and Eurydice remains imprisoned in the realm of the dead? What if his beloved is calling out to him, begging him not to abandon her, and he cannot hear because of the strange properties of this place? These doubts multiply with each step he takes, but Orpheus forces himself to continue forward. He has accepted the conditions completely, and that means trusting not just in Hades' word, but in his own ability to maintain faith even when uncertainty threatens to overwhelm him. The path out of the underworld proves longer and more treacherous than his descent. Where his journey down had been aided by determination and the element of surprise, this ascent must be made in oppressive silence, with the weight of precious cargo he cannot see or verify. Every shadow seems to hide potential pitfalls. Every turn in the path might lead to separation from the soul he has come so far to reclaim. Worse than the physical challenges are the psychological ones. Other denizens of the underworld seem to sense what is happening and emerge from their hiding places to watch this unprecedented exodus. Some call out warnings, others offer encouragement, but Orpheus cannot respond to any of them without breaking the conditions of his agreement. He must walk through their voices like a man walking through a storm, buffeted by words and emotions but unable to acknowledge any of it. The silence imposed upon him becomes a torture unlike anything he has ever experienced. Music has been his language for as long as he can remember, the way he processes emotion and makes sense of the world. To be cut off from this essential part of himself while undertaking the most important journey of his life feels like being asked to climb a mountain while blind and deaf. And always, there is the question of whether Eurydice truly follows behind him. Sometimes he thinks he can hear her breathing or the rustle of the silk dress she wore when they were married. Other times the silence stretches so completely that he begins to fear she was never there at all, that his desperate hope has made him hear phantom sounds where none exist. The worst moments come when the path splits or turns sharply, and his instincts as a protective husband scream at him to look back and ensure she doesn't take a wrong turning. How can he lead her safely through this maze if he cannot communicate, cannot guide, cannot even confirm that she is there to be guided? What would you do in such a situation, forced to choose between love and certainty, between faith and verification? For me, it has to be one of the cruelest tests ever devised. The very thing that makes love precious, the desire to protect and care for your beloved, becomes the potential instrument of its destruction. Hours pass, or perhaps days' time moves strangely in the underworld, and Orpheus has no way to measure its passage. His feet begin to ache from the rocky path, his throat grows parched from enforced silence, but still he climbs steadily upward, following passages he remembers from his descent. Gradually, the oppressive weight of the underworld begins to lift. The air grows less thick, less tainted with the scent of death and decay. The walls around him shift from black stone to earthen passages, suggesting that he is approaching the upper levels of this realm, drawing closer to the boundary between death and life. It is then that he begins to hear what sounds like weeping behind him, soft, heartbroken sobs that cut through him like knives. If Eurydice is crying, if she is in pain or afraid, shouldn't he comfort her? Shouldn't he at least turn to offer silent reassurance that he is aware of her distress? But the conditions were explicit, no looking back, no matter what. Orpheus forces himself to continue climbing, even as the sound of those sobs grows more pronounced. He tells himself that the echoes in these passages might be distorting sounds, that what he hears might not be Eurydice at all, but some other tormented soul he is passing along the way. Yet with each step his resolve weakens. The crying behind him sounds so much like his beloved wife, so full of the particular cadences of her voice when she is truly distressed. How can he ignore such obvious pain? What kind of husband allows his wife to suffer in silence when he has the power to offer comfort? The internal debate rages as he climbs, each argument strengthening his doubt and eroding his faith. By the time he reaches the final passage, the one that will lead to the crack in the earth through which he first entered this realm, his nerves are stretched to their breaking point. He can see it now, a faint glow ahead that speaks of sunlight, of the world above, of life and hope and freedom. Just a few more steps, perhaps a dozen, and they will both be free. He will have succeeded in the impossible, will have won back his love from death itself through the power of music and the strength of their bond. The weeping behind him grows louder, more desperate, as if Eurydice can also see their salvation ahead and is overwhelmed by the nearness of it. Or perhaps, and this thought strikes him like a physical blow, perhaps she cannot see the exit, cannot tell how close they are, and fears that this journey will continue forever through endless underground passages. Orpheus's step falters as this new possibility takes hold of him. What if the conditions are even more specific than he understood? What if Eurydice is not actually following the same path he is taking, but is instead being led through some parallel passage where she cannot see the approaching sunlight? What if she needs guidance to find the final exit, needs him to call out directions or at least look back to catch her attention and point toward freedom? The uncertainty becomes unbearable. Just steps away from success, from the reunion that will restore meaning to his existence, Orpheus finds himself paralyzed by doubt. Every instinct he possesses as a lover, a protector, a partner in the deepest sense of the word is telling him to turn around, to verify that Eurydice is truly there, to help her navigate these final crucial moments. The logical part of his mind reminds him of Hades' conditions, warns him that a single backward glance will destroy everything he has worked to achieve. But the emotional part of his heart, the part that has been slowly fragmenting throughout this entire silent journey, cannot bear the thought of reaching safety alone, of discovering that his beloved was never truly there, or that she has somehow been lost along the way. Standing just a few steps from the exit, with sunlight streaming down to warm his face and the sounds of the living world calling to him from above, Orpheus makes the choice that will define the rest of his existence. He turns around. In the instant before he sees her, time seems suspended. All possibilities exist simultaneously: success and failure, reunion and eternal separation, hope and despair. Then his eyes focus, and he sees Eurydice there behind him, just as he had prayed she would be. She is more beautiful than memory had painted her, her face radiant with joy at their approaching freedom. Her hand is stretched out toward him, her lips forming his name in silent celebration. Love and relief and triumph shine in her eyes as she recognizes how close they have come to achieving the impossible. But even as he drinks in the sight of her, even as his heart soars with the knowledge that she was real, was truly following, was just steps away from returning to life, Orpheus realizes his mistake. The sunlight that warms his face marks the boundary of the underworld. He has already exited, already broken the conditions of their agreement by looking back before she too has reached the surface. The expression of joy on Eurydice's face shifts to understanding, then to forgiveness, then to a sadness deeper than any earthly sorrow. She does not rage at him for his failure, does not curse him for coming so close only to destroy their chance at the final moment. Instead, she smiles with infinite tenderness, as if to say that she understands exactly why he could not help himself, and that she forgives him completely. "I love you!" Her lips form silently, and then she begins to fade, becoming translucent as the underworld reclaims her. Orpheus reaches out desperately, trying to grasp her hand, but his fingers close on empty air. The last thing he sees is her eyes, full of love and sorrow and a strange kind of peace, before she vanishes entirely. The silence that follows is complete and crushing. Orpheus stands at the entrance to the underworld, 1 foot in shadow and 1 in sunlight, having achieved the impossible only to lose it again through his own inability to maintain faith over certainty, love over fear. He tries to re-enter the realm of the dead, to follow her back down into darkness and plead for another chance. But the crack in the earth begins to close even as he steps toward it, sealing itself with finality that speaks of divine judgment. Hades has kept his bargain exactly as promised. Orpheus was granted the chance to reclaim his beloved, failed to meet the conditions, and now must live with the consequences of that failure. The return to the world of the living proves almost impossible to bear. Everything Orpheus sees reminds him of Eurydice, of their shared happiness, of the future they will never have together. Their grove, once a paradise of love and music, now feels like a mausoleum filled with the ghosts of better days. He tries to resume his old life, but the music that was once his greatest gift now brings only pain. Every melody reminds him of songs he composed for Eurydice. Every harmony echoes with her voice joining his in perfect blend. Even the most joyful compositions emerge from his lyre tinged with minor keys, transformed by grief into laments that make listeners weep without understanding why. The other gods attempt to comfort him. Apollo offers distractions, adventures, new purposes that might help him move beyond his loss. The muses try to rekindle his interest in the arts, suggesting collaborations that could create beauty from his pain. Even mortals seek him out, hoping that their reverence and admiration might remind him of his gifts, of his unique place in the world. But Orpheus rejects all offers of comfort or companionship. He has no interest in creating new relationships, no desire for distractions from his loss. Love for him was not a general capacity but a specific bond with one irreplaceable person. Without Eurydice, the very idea of happiness feels like a betrayal of what they shared. Years pass in this manner, with Orpheus becoming increasingly isolated from both divine and mortal society. He wanders the countryside like a ghost himself, playing music that speaks only of loss and longing. His songs become legendary for their heartbreaking beauty, but also for their power to reduce listeners to inconsolable grief. Some who hear him play are inspired to love more deeply, understanding for the first time what it means to cherish someone completely while you have the chance. Others become afraid of love altogether, terrified by the example of how completely it can destroy when lost. But perhaps the strangest effect of Orpheus's laments is on the natural world itself. Animals who hear his music become monogamous for life, choosing single mates and mourning unto death when separated from them. Trees that grow where his tears have fallen never bloom again, but instead produce wood so hard and resonant that it becomes sought after for musical instruments. Flowers that spring up in his footprints bloom only once, creating displays of heartbreaking beauty that last just long enough for observers to glimpse them before withering away forever. The years of wandering eventually take their toll on Orpheus's immortal constitution. While he cannot die of age or disease as mortals do, the constant grief wears at his spirit until he becomes a shadow of his former self. His divine beauty fades, his famous strength diminishes, his legendary musical gifts begin to falter as his heart grows too weary to sustain them. It is during this period of decline that he encounters the Maenads, the wild female followers of Dionysus who celebrate their god through frenzied dancing and savage rites. These women have heard of Orpheus, have been angered by stories of his rejection of all love save his devotion to dead Eurydice. In their wine-fueled madness, they see his fidelity not as admirable but as an insult to their god, who represents passion in all its forms. They interpret his refusal to love again as a denial of life itself, a rejection of the very forces that make existence worth celebrating. The encounter that ends Orpheus's mortal existence happens on a mountainside in Thrace, not far from where he was born. The Maenads come upon him during one of his midnight concerts to the stars, when his music reaches its most transcendent and heartbreaking peaks. At first, even these wild women are moved to stillness by the beauty of his laments. But as his songs continue, speaking always of loss and never of hope, their reverence turns to rage. How dare he fill the world with such despair? How dare he use his divine gifts to spread sorrow rather than joy? How dare he insist that love lost is more worthy of celebration than love that might yet be found? They attack not with weapons, but with the instruments of their wild worship staffs crowned with ivy, cups meant for wine, their own hands and voices raised in frenzied opposition to his mournful melodies. For the first time in his life, Orpheus's music fails to gentle, savage hearts. The Maenads' rage is too great, their dedication to ecstatic life too strong to be moved by songs of beautiful death. What follows is brief but terrible. Orpheus, weakened by years of grief and unpracticed in any form of self-defense, cannot protect himself against their assault. His lyre is shattered, its strings releasing one final discordant cry before falling silent forever. His voice, which once commanded the attention of gods and mortals alike, is stilled as brutally as his wife's was stilled by the serpent's bite. But even in death, love proves stronger than hatred. As Orpheus's spirit separates from his broken body, it immediately begins its journey back to the underworld, not as a supplicant this time, but as a soul rightfully claiming its place in the realm of the dead. And there, waiting for him at the shore of the river Styx, stands Eurydice. She appears exactly as he remembered her from their happiest days together, before death touched her with its strange beauty, before grief marked him with its terrible wisdom. Her smile holds all the warmth that sustained him through their mortal years, all the understanding that made their partnership perfect, all the love that neither death nor time nor distance could diminish. "My beloved," she says, her voice carrying the same musical quality that first enchanted him in that olive grove so long ago, "you kept your promise." "What promise?" Orpheus asks, momentarily confused. So much has happened, so much has been lost and lost again, that he cannot immediately recall what she means. "You promised to try to honor the love we shared," Eurydice reminds him gently. "You promised to remember the joy rather than dwelling only on the sorrow." "And you did try, didn't you? Even when the pain seemed unbearable, even when every song became a lament, you never stopped celebrating what we had together." And Orpheus realizes she is right. In all his years of mourning, in all his songs of loss and longing, he had never once suggested that loving Eurydice had been a mistake. He had never wished they had never met, never regretted the joy they shared, even though it made the subsequent pain more intense. His laments themselves had been a form of celebration, a way of insisting that their love was too precious to be forgotten, too perfect to be diminished by death. "I tried," he agrees, taking her outstretched hand and feeling complete for the first time since that terrible day in the meadow. "I tried to show the world what we had, even if I could only do it through songs of sorrow." That was enough, Eurydice assures him, her fingers intertwining with his in the gesture that had always been their signal of perfect understanding. More than enough. You kept our love alive in the world long after both of us were gone from it. You made sure that others would know what it means to love completely, to cherish deeply, to remain faithful even when faithfulness brings pain rather than comfort. Together, they walk toward whatever lies beyond even the underworld, toward realms where love needs no expression through suffering, where perfect partnership can exist without the shadow of loss. Behind them, their story continues to ripple outward through the world of the living, inspiring poets and musicians, lovers and dreamers, anyone who has ever wondered whether it is possible to love someone so completely that not even death can sever the bond between them. Their tale becomes the template for every great love story that follows, the proof that some connections transcend the physical world, that some loves are so profound they reshape the very cosmos around them. Couples separated by distance comfort themselves with the knowledge that Orpheus and Eurydice found each other again. Those facing the death of beloved partners take strength from the assurance that love continues beyond the grave, that souls who truly belong together will always find their way back to each other. But perhaps most importantly, their story serves as a reminder that love is not diminished by tragedy, but rather revealed by it. It is easy to love when everything is perfect, when no obstacles arise, when no tests threaten the bonds between hearts. True love proves itself in the darker moments, in the willingness to brave any danger, accept any challenge, face any loss rather than abandon the person who completes your soul. In the realm beyond death, where Orpheus and Eurydice now dwell together, their love has been purified of all earthly complications. There is no jealousy there, no misunderstanding, no fear of loss, because loss is no longer possible. They exist in perfect harmony. Two souls so completely attuned to each other that they function as a single, unified whole while remaining entirely themselves. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark and the stars seem closer to the earth, lovers in the world above claim they can hear distant music drifting down from whatever celestial realm Orpheus and Eurydice now call home. The melodies speak not of sorrow but of joy, the joy of love that has been tested by the worst possible circumstances and emerged not just intact, but somehow strengthened, refined into something approaching divine perfection. Those who hear this phantom music often find their own relationships deepened by the experience. They are reminded of what truly matters in love, of the importance of cherishing each day together rather than taking partnership for granted. They are inspired to be more patient with their beloved's faults, more grateful for their beloved's virtues, more committed to working through whatever challenges arise rather than abandoning the relationship when difficulties appear. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice thus becomes not just a tale of mythic love, but a guide for anyone seeking to understand what love can be at its highest and purest. It teaches that real love is not just emotion but commitment, not just feeling but choice, not just desire but dedication to another person's well-being, even when that dedication demands sacrifice. It shows that love's greatest enemy is not hatred or indifference, but doubt. The failure to trust completely in the bond between souls, the inability to maintain faith when external evidence suggests that hope is foolish. Orpheus's backward glance was not caused by lack of love, but by excess of it, by caring so deeply that uncertainty became unbearable. Yet even this failure is transformed into teaching. The story suggests that love which can survive such failure, which can forgive such weakness, which can find reunion even beyond death itself, is love that has transcended all earthly limitations. Orpheus and Eurydice's love becomes perfect, not because it never faced challenges, but because it overcame every challenge, including the ultimate challenge of the grave itself. For those who hear their story and take it to heart, it becomes a source of hope that no separation is truly final, that no love is ever truly lost. It whispers that the bonds we forge with our deepest beloveds are written not just in our hearts, but in the very fabric of existence itself, that the universe itself conspires to reunite souls that belong together. And perhaps that is the most beautiful aspect of their tale. Not just that love can conquer death, but that love can redeem failure, transform tragedy, create meaning from suffering. Orpheus and Eurydice's story gives weight and significance to every small act of devotion, every daily choice to prioritize a partner's happiness, every moment when love chooses hope over fear, faith over doubt, connection over self-protection. Their legacy lives on in every couple who looks at each other and decides that whatever challenges life brings, they will face them together. It resonates in every voice raised in song about love, every poem written to capture the essence of perfect partnership, every story told about the power of the human heart to transcend its limitations. Most of all, it endures in the quiet moments between lovers, in the comfortable silences, the knowing glances, the gentle touches that speak of understanding deeper than words. For it is in these small, daily expressions of love that the grand passion of Orpheus and Eurydice finds its truest echo, proving that their mythic love story is not just ancient history, but a living reality, available to any two people brave enough to open their hearts completely to each other. But to truly understand the profound impact of this timeless tale, we must delve deeper into the mysteries that lie at its heart. There are layers to this story that reveal themselves only when we examine not just what happened, but why it happened, how it happened, and what it continues to mean for all who encounter it. You are about to explore the hidden depths of a myth that has shaped human understanding of love, death, art, and the very nature of existence itself. Let us begin with perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this entire tale. The unprecedented power that flowed through Orpheus's music, a force so profound that it could literally reshape reality itself. This was not mere entertainment or even artistic expression as we understand it today, but something far more fundamental and transformative. You find yourself once again in that ancient world where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms were far more permeable than they are in our modern age. Here, music was understood not as organized sound, but as a direct manifestation of cosmic harmony, the very force that kept stars in their courses and seasons in their proper order. When Orpheus played his lyre, he was not simply creating beautiful melodies, he was tapping into the underlying musical structure of existence itself. The Greeks had a word for what Orpheus's music could achieve: katharsis, meaning purification or cleansing, particularly the profound emotional release that comes when art touches the deepest parts of the human soul. But Orpheus's gift went beyond even this elevated concept, reaching into realms that challenged the very nature of what was possible in the ordered cosmos. Consider what happened when his fingers first touched those 7 divine strings crafted by Hermes himself. The sound that emerged was not just music, but a form of prayer made audible, a bridge between the mortal world and the realm of pure spirit. Each note carried within it the accumulated wisdom of the Muses, the creative power of Apollo, and something uniquely Orpheus's own, a yearning for connection and understanding that resonated with every living thing that heard it. You watch as he plays in that olive grove where you first encountered him, and you begin to understand why his music had such unprecedented effects on the natural world. The trees that bent their branches to listen were not simply responding to pleasant sounds, but recognizing in his melodies the same life force that flowed through their roots and branches. His music spoke the secret language that all growing things understand, the rhythm of sap rising in spring and leaves falling in autumn, the patient heartbeat of seasons turning and years passing. When wild animals approached his concerts and lay down in peaceful submission, they were not being magically controlled or hypnotized. Instead, They were hearing something that touched the most primal part of their nature, the part that remembered when all creatures lived in harmony, before fear and hunger and territorial instinct divided predator from prey. Orpheus's music temporarily restored that ancient peace, reminding lions and lambs alike of their fundamental kinship as children of the same earth. Even more remarkable was his effect on inanimate objects, on things that by all logic should have been immune to musical influence. Stones that rolled from their resting places to gather around him were responding to vibrations that went deeper than sound waves, harmonics that resonated with the crystalline structures within their mineral hearts. Rivers that paused in their flow to listen were recognizing melodies that echoed the songs they themselves sang as they moved from mountain springs to distant seas. But it was when Orpheus played for human audiences that the true depth of his gift became apparent. Those who heard him described experiences that went far beyond aesthetic appreciation or emotional response. They spoke of feeling as if veils had been lifted from their eyes, as if they were seeing the world clearly for the first time. His music didn't just move them, it transformed them, purging away everything petty and small and selfish, leaving behind only the essential truth of what it meant to be human. This power of catharsis that flowed through Orpheus's music was what made his journey to the underworld possible. He didn't conquer death through strength or cunning or divine intervention, but through the sheer force of artistic truth. When he played for Charon, the ferryman of the dead, he wasn't bribing or threatening or pleading. He was offering something infinitely more valuable, the gift of feeling fully alive in a realm where such sensations had been forgotten. You follow Orpheus's music as it spreads through the underworld like ripples on a dark pond, touching souls that had been numb with despair for countless centuries. The dead who gathered to hear him weren't drawn by curiosity or entertainment, but by a desperate hunger for the kind of emotional authenticity they had lost when they crossed the threshold from life to death. His melodies reminded them of what it felt like to hope, to love, to experience joy so intense it made the heart ache with gratitude. The profound impact on Charon deserves particular attention. This ancient being who had ferried souls across the river Styx for millennia without ever being moved by their pleas or their sorrow, found himself weeping for the first time in his immortal existence. The tears that fell from his weathered face were not tears of sadness, though certainly his music contained elements of grief. Instead, they were tears of recognition, the overwhelming emotion that comes when we encounter something that speaks directly to our deepest truth. Charon wept because Orpheus's music reminded him of why his job mattered, why the boundary between life and death was sacred rather than merely bureaucratic. For eons, he had seen his role as simply ferrying souls from one realm to another, a task no more meaningful than moving cargo from one warehouse to another. But Orpheus's laments helped him remember that every soul he carried represented a complete universe of experience, a unique story of love and loss and hope and fear that deserved to be honored rather than merely processed. The encounter with Cerberus revealed another dimension of music's transformative power. This three-headed guardian, bred and trained for savagery, possessed no capacity for gentleness or mercy in its original nature. Yet when Orpheus played that simple song about befriending a lonely dog, something miraculous occurred. Each of the beast's three heads began to remember not its current existence as a weapon of the underworld, but some deeper, older truth about what it meant to be a creature capable of loyalty and affection. The middle head, which had always been the most aggressive, was the first to respond. As the melody washed over it, memories surfaced that seemed impossible, recollections of running through sunny meadows, of playing with companions, of receiving gentle touches from caring hands. These were not memories from its own life, for Cerberus had never known such experiences, but rather ancestral memories written into the very essence of what it meant to be a dog, no matter how monstrous the form that nature had taken. Which mythological moment do you find most moving? The transformation of savage beasts into gentle creatures, or the awakening of long-buried emotions in the hearts of the dead? For me, it has to be Cerberus discovering its capacity for tenderness. There's something profound about witnessing the moment when even the most hardened heart remembers what it was like to be vulnerable and loving. But it was in the throne room of Hades and Persephone that Orpheus's musical katharsis achieved its most extraordinary triumph. These were not beings who could be easily moved or manipulated. Hades had ruled the realm of the dead for eons, making decisions that affected the fate of every soul that entered his domain. His heart had been necessarily hardened by the weight of such responsibility, by the need to maintain order in a realm where chaos would mean suffering beyond imagination. Persephone, too, had learned to protect herself emotionally. Her abduction from the world of the living had taught her that vulnerability was dangerous, that opening one's heart completely could lead to devastating loss. She had found ways to love her husband while keeping part of herself safely guarded, maintaining the emotional distance necessary to function as queen of such a somber realm. Yet when Orpheus played his plea for Eurydice's return, both of these powerful deities found themselves experiencing emotions they had thought themselves beyond. The music didn't manipulate them or trick them into feeling something artificial. Instead, it stripped away the protective barriers they had constructed around their hearts, revealing the profound love and compassion that still existed beneath their necessary hardness. Hades wept not because the music was sad, but because it reminded him of his own capacity for tenderness, his own ability to love so completely that the thought of loss became unbearable. Persephone's tears came from recognizing in Orpheus's plea an echo of her own longing, her own struggles with being separated from everything that had once defined her identity and happiness. The catharsis that Orpheus's music produced in the rulers of the Underworld was so complete that it temporarily transformed the very nature of their realm. For the duration of his performance, the Underworld ceased to be a place of punishment and became instead a place of healing, where even the most tormented souls found moments of peace and understanding. The rivers of fire burned less fiercely, the winds of lamentation grew still, and for the first time in its existence, the realm of the dead knew something approaching hope. This transformation wasn't magical in the sense of being supernatural or impossible to understand. Rather, it was the natural result of what happens when authentic artistic expression encounters hearts that are open enough to receive it. Orpheus's music was powerful not because it contained spells or divine commands, but because it was completely honest, a direct transmission of genuine emotion that couldn't be denied or dismissed. The art that achieves true catharsis always works in this way. It doesn't tell its audience what to feel, but rather creates space for them to experience their own deepest emotions more fully. Orpheus's laments didn't force Hades and Persephone to pity him, but rather allowed them to access their own capacity for empathy, their own understanding of what it means to love someone so completely that their absence makes the world feel incomplete. This is why his music succeeded where force or trickery would have failed utterly. The Underworld, by its very nature, is immune to deception and resistant to coercion. Its rules are too fundamental, too woven into the fabric of existence itself, to be bypassed through clever schemes or divine intervention. But authentic emotion, genuine artistic truth, carries with it a power that transcends even the most absolute laws. When Orpheus played his heart's deepest song before the throne of death itself, he wasn't asking for special treatment or exemption from universal rules. He was offering something far more valuable, a demonstration of what love could be at its most perfect and complete, a living example of the kind of connection that gives meaning to existence itself. In the face of such authentic beauty, even death itself was moved to make an exception. But this raises profound questions about the nature of the conditions that Hades imposed upon Orpheus's return journey. If his music was powerful enough to move the immutable hearts of the Underworld's rulers, why wasn't it strong enough to sustain him through the relatively simple task of walking to the surface without looking back? The answer lies in understanding that the power of catharsis, while transformative, is also temporary. Like all profound emotional experiences, it cannot be sustained indefinitely without losing its intensity and meaning. The moment of perfect understanding and compassion that Orpheus created in Hades' throne room was genuine and complete, but it was also finite, a brief window of possibility that would close as soon as the music ended and normal reality reasserted itself. Moreover, the conditions imposed upon Orpheus were not arbitrary tests of his worthiness, but rather reflections of fundamental laws that govern the relationship between life and death. His music could create moments of exception to these laws, could open doorways that normally remained sealed, but it could not permanently alter the underlying structure of reality itself. This brings us to perhaps the most tragic aspect of Orpheus's gift. Its very perfection made it unsuitable for the ordinary challenges of existence. His music could move gods and monsters, could open the gates of death itself, could transform the hardest hearts into fountains of compassion. But it could not quiet the simple human doubt that made him turn around on that final stairway to the surface world. The power of katharsis, for all its magnificence, operates in the realm of feeling rather than logic. It can create profound moments of emotional truth and spiritual transformation, but it cannot provide the steady, rational faith needed to sustain difficult journeys through uncertainty. Orpheus's music could convince Hades to release Eurydice, but it could not convince Orpheus himself that she was truly following behind him. This limitation reveals something important about the nature of artistic power itself. Art at its highest level can indeed change hearts and open minds, can create moments of transcendence that alter how we see ourselves and the world around us. But the changes it produces must then be integrated into daily life, must be tested against the prosaic realities of existence, and not every profound emotional experience proves durable enough to survive such testing. Orpheus's tragedy was that his gift was so extraordinary, so far beyond normal human capacity, that it isolated him from the ordinary sources of strength and comfort that sustain most people through difficult times. He could create music that moved the cosmos itself, but he could not access the simple faith that would have let him trust in love's ability to follow wherever he might lead. In this sense, his story becomes not just a tale of love and loss, but a meditation on the relationship between artistic genius and human happiness. The very qualities that made Orpheus capable of such transcendent music, his sensitivity, his emotional intensity, his ability to feel more deeply than ordinary mortals, also made him vulnerable to doubts and fears that less gifted individuals might have overcome more easily. The catharsis his music provided for others came at the cost of his own emotional stability. By pouring all of his deepest feelings into his art, by using music as the primary means of processing and expressing his inner life, he may have diminished his ability to find peace through other means. When music failed him, when the silence imposed by Hades made his usual coping mechanisms unavailable, he had no other resources to draw upon. This dynamic continues to resonate with artists and creators throughout history. The same intensity of feeling that enables the creation of transformative art can make the artist's personal life more difficult, more fraught with emotional extremes that are challenging to navigate. The gift that allows one to touch the hearts of multitudes can sometimes make it harder to maintain the steady, quiet connections that provide personal happiness and stability. Yet none of this diminishes the extraordinary nature of what Orpheus achieved through his music. His ability to create genuine catharsis in those who heard him, to purify their emotions, to help them access their deepest capacity for love and empathy, to temporarily transform the very nature of reality through the power of authentic artistic expression, remains one of the most remarkable gifts ever attributed to any figure in mythology or history. His legacy reminds us that art at its highest level is not entertainment or decoration, but something approaching divine power. The ability to reveal truth, to heal wounds, to create connections between souls that transcend all ordinary barriers. When we encounter such art in our own lives, When we find ourselves moved to tears or laughter or profound contemplation by a song or story or painting, we are experiencing an echo of the same force that allowed Orpheus to charm death itself. But now we must turn our attention to the moment that defines this entire tale, the instant that transforms a story of triumph into one of tragedy, success into failure, hope into despair. We must examine with unflinching honesty the most famous and heartbreaking moment in all of mythology. That fatal backward glance that cost Orpheus everything he had worked to achieve. The question that has haunted readers and listeners for over 2 millennia is deceptively simple. Why did he look back? What could have compelled a man who had already achieved the impossible, who was mere steps away from reuniting with his beloved, to make the one choice that would destroy everything? The answer, like all profound truths, is both simple and infinitely complex. It requires us to delve into the deepest mysteries of human psychology, to examine the ways that love and fear intertwine, to understand how the very intensity of our desires can become the instruments of their own defeat. You must understand that this was not a moment of simple weakness or casual disobedience. Orpheus was not a reckless youth making an impulsive decision, nor was he someone who had forgotten or dismissed the conditions of his agreement with Hades. The weight of what he was attempting, the magnitude of the stakes involved, was constantly present in his consciousness as he made that agonizing climb toward the surface world. Every step of that journey was a battle between competing forces within his soul. On one side stood his logical mind, reminding him constantly of the conditions he had accepted, urging him to maintain faith and discipline just a little longer, promising him that success was within reach if he could only hold steady for a few more moments. On the other side was something far more primal and powerful, the overwhelming force of love itself, manifesting not as gentle affection but as desperate, consuming need. This was love, stripped of all its romantic idealization, revealed in its raw form as one of the most powerful drives in human existence, capable of overriding reason, overwhelming willpower, and making seemingly impossible choices feel not just necessary but inevitable. To understand what happened in that final moment, you must first understand what the journey through the underworld had done to Orpheus's already strained emotional state. For days, or perhaps weeks, time moves strangely in the realm of the dead. He had been forced to maintain perfect self-control under conditions of unbearable stress. He had been compelled to remain silent when every instinct screamed at him to call out reassurances to his wife, to let her know that he was aware of her presence, that he would not abandon her, that she could trust him to lead them both to safety. The enforced muteness was particularly torturous for someone whose entire identity was built around expression through sound and music. Worse still was the uncertainty that gnawed at him with each passing step. Unable to look back, unable to speak, he had no way to confirm that Eurydice was actually following. The acoustics of the underworld were strange and distorting. Sometimes he thought he could hear her footsteps behind him. Sometimes the silence stretched so completely that he began to fear she had never been there at all. As the journey progressed, these doubts multiplied and intensified. What if Hades had been deceiving him from the beginning? What if the figure he had seen in the throne room had been an illusion, a cruel trick designed to torment him with false hope? What if the conditions of the agreement had been designed to be impossible to fulfill, ensuring his failure from the start? Even more tormenting were the doubts about Eurydice herself. What if she had been given different instructions? What if she had been told to take a different path or warned away from following too closely? What if she had become lost in the labyrinthine passages of the underworld, calling out for help that he could not hear and could not answer because of his enforced silence? But perhaps the most insidious doubt of all was the one that attacked his understanding of love itself. As the journey stretched on and the uncertainty became unbearable, Orpheus began to question whether his quest was actually an act of love or merely one of selfish desperation. Was he truly trying to save Eurydice, or was he simply unable to accept the reality of loss? Was his willingness to risk everything for her return a testament to the depth of his devotion, or evidence of his inability to let her rest in peace? These psychological torments were compounded by the physical challenges of the journey itself. The path from the depths of the underworld to the surface is not a simple upward climb, but a treacherous route through caverns that seem designed to test the resolve of anyone attempting to traverse them. Sharp stones cut his feet, sudden drops appeared without warning, and passages that seemed clear suddenly narrowed to barely passable gaps. Each obstacle required careful navigation, demanded his full attention and sure footing. Yet all the while, his mind was consumed with worry about whether Eurydice was managing these same challenges behind him. Could she see well enough in the dim light to avoid the pitfalls? Was she strong enough to climb the steeper sections? If she stumbled or fell, would he even know? The enforced separation between them, walking the same path but unable to communicate, facing the same dangers but unable to help each other, was perhaps crueler than if they had been kept apart entirely. To be so close to reunion yet unable to experience it, to be technically together yet functionally alone, created a particular kind of psychological anguish that pushed Orpheus toward his breaking point. By the time he could see the faint glow of sunlight ahead, marking the boundary between the underworld and the realm of the living, his mental state had deteriorated to something approaching madness. The rational part of his mind still understood the conditions and urged him to maintain discipline just a little longer, but that rational voice was being drowned out by a chorus of fears, doubts, and desperate needs that had grown stronger with each passing moment. It was then that he heard what sounded like weeping behind him, soft, heartbroken sobs that cut through him like physical blows. If that truly was Eurydice crying, then she was in distress, possibly afraid, certainly suffering in some way that his protective instincts demanded he address immediately. But was it really her? The strange acoustics of the underworld made it impossible to be certain. The sound might be echoes from other tormented souls, or tricks of wind through the cavern passages, or even his own exhausted mind creating phantom sounds to match his fears. The uncertainty became literally unbearable. Standing at the threshold between worlds, so close to success that he could feel sunlight warming his face, Orpheus found himself paralyzed by the competing demands of love and obedience, faith and verification, hope and fear. It was in this moment of ultimate crisis that we see revealed the deepest truth about human nature, that our greatest strengths and our greatest weaknesses often spring from the same source. The love that gave Orpheus the courage to attempt the impossible was the same love that made uncertainty about Eurydice's well-being unendurable. His backward glance was not a betrayal of their relationship, but the ultimate expression of it. He turned because he loved her too much to proceed without knowing she was safe, because his instinct to protect and comfort her was stronger than his ability to trust in abstract promises, because in that crucial moment the needs of the heart overcame the demands of logic. Yet this psychological explanation, while accurate as far as it goes, only tells part of the story. There are other interpretations of that fatal moment that reveal different aspects of its meaning and significance. Some ancient commentators suggested that Orpheus's backward glance was not a moment of weakness at all, but rather a deliberate choice born of profound wisdom. According to this interpretation, he realized during that final ascent that success would not truly restore what he had lost. The Eurydice who returned from death would be forever changed by her experience, marked by shadows that would always separate her from the woman he had loved. More troubling still was the realization that their relationship itself could never be what it had been before. How do you love someone you have literally rescued from death? How do you live normally with a person whose existence depends on your having conquered the impossible? The dynamics of their partnership would be forever altered, with Eurydice owing her very life to Orpheus's extraordinary deed. According to this interpretation, Orpheus looked back because he understood that some things, once lost, cannot be truly recovered, only replaced by something different, something that bears the shape of what was lost but lacks its essential spirit. In choosing failure over a success that would be hollow at its core, he preserved the perfection of their original love, ensuring it could never be diminished by the compromises and complications that would inevitably follow a successful return. This reading of the story is particularly compelling because it aligns with what we know about Orpheus as an artist. Artists throughout history have often been drawn to tragedy, to loss, to experiences that generate the kind of profound emotion that fuels great art. A happy ending, a simple restoration of what was lost, might have been personally satisfying but artistically sterile. By choosing the backward glance, whether consciously or unconsciously, Orpheus transformed his personal tragedy into universal art. The story of perfect love, briefly achieved and then lost forever, has resonated with audiences for millennia in a way that a simple tale of love conquering death never could. His loss became humanity's gain, his failure, the foundation for one of our most enduring explorations of what it means to love completely. There is even a more radical interpretation that suggests the backward glance was not Orpheus's choice at all, but rather an expression of Eurydice's will. According to this reading, she somehow influenced or compelled him to turn around because she herself could not bear the thought of returning to life after having experienced death's revelations. This interpretation paints Eurydice not as a passive victim of tragedy, but as an active participant who recognized that resurrection would be a form of spiritual diminishment. Having seen whatever lies beyond the veil of mortality, having gained knowledge that no living person possesses, she may have realized that returning to ordinary existence would be impossible or even undesirable. Her tears during that final ascent, according to this reading, were not expressions of fear or pain, but of her own struggle with the choice she was being forced to make. By subtly influencing Orpheus to look back, perhaps through some supernatural means available to one who existed between life and death, she chose to preserve the integrity of her transformed state rather than accept a restoration that would be incomplete at best. This interpretation gives Eurydice agency in her own story, making her something more than merely the object of Orpheus's quest. It suggests that their love was so profound that even separated by death, they remained connected enough for her will to influence his actions at the crucial moment. Yet another reading focuses not on the psychology of the individuals involved, but on the broader theological and philosophical implications of the story. According to this interpretation, the backward glance was inevitable because it represents a fundamental truth about the human condition. Our inability to accept mystery, our compulsive need to verify and control even those experiences that can only be sustained through faith. The journey from the underworld requires a particular kind of trust that most humans find impossible to maintain. It demands belief without evidence, action without confirmation, forward movement without the reassurance that comes from being able to assess one's situation fully. These requirements go against every survival instinct, every learned behavior that helps us navigate the complexities of existence. Orpheus's failure, according to this reading, was not a personal weakness but a representation of universal human limitations. We are beings who live through our senses, who depend on verification and confirmation to feel secure in our choices. To ask someone to proceed without looking back is to ask them to act against their fundamental nature. This interpretation makes the story not just a tale of individual tragedy, but a meditation on the constraints that define human existence. We are creatures caught between our highest aspirations and our deepest limitations, capable of conceiving of perfect love and absolute faith, but unable to sustain either for the time required to achieve our most profound goals. The backward glance becomes, in this reading, a symbol of all the ways that human nature defeats human dreams. It represents every moment when doubt overcomes faith, when fear conquers love, when our limitations prove stronger than our aspirations. Yet it also represents the tragic beauty of a species that keeps trying despite these limitations, that continues to reach for the impossible even knowing that success is unlikely. From this perspective, Orpheus's story is ultimately hopeful rather than despairing. Yes, he failed to rescue Eurydice from death, but he succeeded in demonstrating that love can motivate attempts at the impossible, that the human heart is capable of caring so deeply that it will risk everything for another's well-being, that there are forms of devotion so complete they reshape the very cosmos around them. The backward glance, rather than negating these achievements, actually confirms them. It shows that Orpheus's love was not abstract or theoretical, but intensely personal and immediate. He looked back not because he loved Eurydice less, but because he loved her so much that proceeding without certainty of her well-being became literally impossible. But there is yet one more interpretation of that fateful moment, one that may be the most unsettling of all. This reading suggests that the backward glance was not a failure at all, but rather the successful completion of a task that was entirely different from what it appeared to be on the surface. According to this interpretation, Hades never intended for Orpheus to succeed in rescuing Eurydice. The conditions imposed upon him were designed to be impossible to fulfill, not out of cruelty, but because the true purpose of the journey was not resurrection but transformation. The real gift that Hades offered was not the return of Eurydice, but the opportunity for Orpheus to fully experience and process his grief. By forcing him to walk the path from death back to life, by making him confront every doubt and fear and desperate hope in his heart, by requiring him to choose between faith and verification at the crucial moment, the Lord of the Dead was providing a form of therapy that no other means could achieve. The backward glance, according to this reading, was not a mistake, but the intended culmination of the journey. By looking back, Orpheus finally accepted the reality of loss, finally chose present truth over comforting illusion, finally demonstrated that he loved Eurydice enough to let her go, rather than forcing her into an existence that would be wrong for both of them. This interpretation transforms the entire story from one of failure to one of profound success. Orpheus entered the underworld as a man destroyed by loss, unable to accept reality, using his divine gifts in desperate attempts to undo what could not be undone. He emerged as someone who had looked directly at the hardest truth of existence, that love sometimes means letting go, and found the strength to make that choice even when it meant accepting unbearable pain. The years of wandering and lamentation that followed were not signs of continued failure, but rather the natural and necessary process of integrating this hard-won wisdom. His music during this period, while heartbreakingly sad, was also transformative for all who heard it. He had learned to create art that honored loss without being destroyed by it, that celebrated love while accepting its limitations, that found meaning in tragedy without denying its pain. When he was finally killed by the Maenads and reunited with Eurydice in death, their embrace represented not just the restoration of their relationship, but the completion of a journey that had transformed both of them into beings capable of perfect love. Love that needed no guarantees, demanded no proofs, and could exist in its full beauty even in the face of uncertainty and loss. This interpretation makes the backward glance not humanity's failure, but rather its greatest achievement, the moment when love becomes wise enough to choose what is best for the beloved rather than what would be most comforting for the lover. It suggests that the highest form of devotion sometimes requires the courage to accept separation, that true partnership sometimes means knowing when to let go. Which of these interpretations resonates most deeply with your own understanding of love and loss? For me, it has to be the idea that the backward glance was an act of love rather than its failure. There's something profound about recognizing that our deepest connections sometimes require us to choose difficulty over comfort, truth over illusion. Whatever interpretation we favour, the backward glance remains one of the most psychologically complex moments in all of mythology. It captures something essential about the human experience, the way our greatest strengths can become our greatest weaknesses, the way love can drive us to both transcendent achievement and tragic failure, the way the most important moments of our lives often turn on split-second decisions that we have no time to fully consider. The enduring power of this moment lies in its recognition that we are not always in control of our most crucial choices, that despite our best intentions and highest aspirations, we remain vulnerable to forces within ourselves that we may not fully understand. Yet it also suggests that these moments of apparent failure can sometimes be expressions of our deepest truths, revealing who we really are when all our defenses and pretenses are stripped away. But to understand why that backward glance had such absolute and irrevocable consequences, we must now turn our attention to the rigid laws that govern the realm of the dead, the unbreakable principles that make the Underworld one of the most precisely ordered domains in all of creation. The condition that Orpheus not look back was not an arbitrary test imposed by capricious gods seeking to make his quest more difficult for their own amusement. Rather, it reflected fundamental laws that govern the boundary between life and death, principles so basic to the structure of reality that even the gods themselves cannot violate them without risking catastrophic consequences. You must understand that in the ancient world, death was not viewed as a simple cessation of life, but as a complex transition involving multiple stages, each governed by its own specific rules and requirements. The process of dying was understood to be as intricate and carefully orchestrated as birth, requiring precise adherence to established procedures to ensure that the deceased soul found its proper place in whatever realm awaited it. The Underworld itself was not a chaotic realm of punishment and suffering, but rather a meticulously organized system designed to process, sort, and ultimately provide appropriate destinations for the countless souls who passed through its gates. Every river had its purpose, every region its specific function, every rule its essential role in maintaining the delicate balance that prevented the entire system from collapsing into disorder. Hades, as ruler of this domain, was not a tyrant imposing arbitrary commands, but rather something closer to a cosmic administrator, responsible for ensuring that the laws governing death and afterlife were followed precisely. His authority derived not from personal power, but from his role as the embodiment and enforcer of principles that existed long before he assumed his throne and would continue long after any individual ruler might pass from the scene. The rule against looking back during the ascent from the Underworld was one of these fundamental principles, rooted in the deepest structures of how transition between realms actually works. To understand why this prohibition was so absolute, you must first understand what it means to move from death back toward life, what forces are involved in such a transition, and why certain actions can irreversibly disrupt the delicate processes required for success. When Eurydice died from the serpent's bite, her soul underwent what ancient Greeks understood as a complete transformation. She ceased to be a creature of the living world, and became instead a being of the realm of the dead, subject to its laws, sustained by its energies, bound to its requirements. This was not merely a change of location, but a fundamental alteration in the nature of her existence. To reverse this transformation, to enable her return to life, required the most complex and delicate magical working ever attempted in the history of the cosmos. It involved temporarily suspending some of the most basic laws governing existence, creating a bubble of possibility within which the normal rules of death and life could be circumvented. But such suspension of natural law could only be maintained under very specific conditions. Like a soap bubble that can exist in air but will pop the moment it encounters too much turbulence, the magical framework that allowed Eurydice to move from death back toward life was extraordinarily fragile. Any action that reinforced her connection to the realm of the dead, any gesture that pulled her backward rather than forward in the transition process, would immediately collapse the entire construct. The prohibition against looking back was necessary because the act of turning around creates a fundamental shift in the direction of one's attention and intention. To move from death to life requires complete focus on the future, absolute commitment to forward progress, unwavering dedication to the realm one is trying to reach. Any backward glance, however brief or well-intentioned, represents a turning away from life and back toward death. More specifically, the act of looking back establishes what ancient magic understood as a line of connection between the living and the dead. When Orpheus turned to gaze upon Eurydice, he was not simply looking at her with his physical eyes, but creating a spiritual link that bound her more firmly to the realm she was trying to leave. You see, Eurydice at that moment existed in a state between life and death, neither fully one nor the other. Her successful transition to life required that she maintain perfect focus on the living world that was her destination, allowing no part of her consciousness to be drawn back toward the realm of shadows she was leaving behind. But when Orpheus looked back at her, his gaze carried with it all the power of living attention, the full force of mortal love and need. This created an irresistible pull that drew her consciousness back toward engagement with death rather than commitment to life. The very intensity of his love, the strength of his desire to see and confirm her presence, became the force that dragged her back into the realm she was trying to escape. The tragic irony is that his backward glance was motivated by the deepest love and concern for her well-being, yet it was precisely this love that created the spiritual dynamics which made her return to life impossible. His need to protect and reassure her became the instrument of her permanent loss. But the rules governing transitions between life and death are even more complex than this explanation suggests. The prohibition against looking back was also related to the fundamental nature of time itself, as it operates in the boundary regions between different realms of existence. In the living world, time moves in a linear fashion from past to future, allowing for growth, change, and the gradual unfolding of new possibilities. In the realm of the dead, time operates according to different principles. Some areas exist in eternal stasis, others in cyclical repetition, still others in patterns that would seem completely alien to living consciousness. The journey from the underworld back to the surface represents a transition between these different temporal systems, a gradual shift from the time patterns of death to those of life. This transition can only occur successfully if the travelers maintain perfect alignment with the temporal flow of their destination. They must think, feel, and act in ways that are consistent with forward-moving, life-oriented time. Looking backward disrupts this alignment by introducing the temporal patterns of the realm of the dead into a process that requires exclusive focus on the patterns of the living world. It creates a kind of temporal whirlpool that drags the travelers back toward the time structure of death, rather than allowing them to complete their transition to the time structure of life. This is why the rule was so specific. Do not look back until you have both completely exited the underworld and stand once again beneath the sun. The sunlight represents not just physical illumination, but the temporal energy of the living world, the force that maintains linear time and enables the kind of growth and change that defines mortal existence. Only when both travelers had been fully immersed in this solar energy, fully reconnected to the temporal patterns of life, would it be safe for them to look back without risking disruption of their transition. At that point, they would both be fully committed to the living world, no longer vulnerable to being pulled back into the different temporal structures that govern the realm of the dead. The absoluteness of the consequences that followed Orpheus's backward glance reflects another fundamental principle of underworld law, the irreversibility of certain magical workings. The spell that allowed Eurydice to begin her return to life was not something that could be partially successful or temporarily suspended. It either worked completely or failed completely, with no middle ground possible. This all-or-nothing nature of the magic was necessary because of the enormous energies involved in reversing death itself. Like a rocket launch that must achieve precisely the right velocity to escape planetary gravity, the transition from death to life required exactly the right conditions maintained for exactly the right duration. Any deviation from the prescribed parameters would result in complete failure, with no possibility of partial success or second attempts. When Orpheus looked back, he didn't simply make their task more difficult or delay their success. He triggered the immediate collapse of all the magical frameworks that had made Eurydice's return possible in the first place. The spell didn't fade gradually or provide warning signs of impending failure. It simply ceased to exist the moment the conditions for its maintenance were violated. This is why Hades could not show mercy or provide second chances once the rule had been broken. It wasn't that he was unwilling to be lenient, but rather that the violation of the conditions had already triggered consequences that were beyond his power to control or modify. The magic that had allowed him to release Eurydice had been undone by Orpheus's actions, and even the Lord of the Dead could not reconstitute what had been so completely destroyed. The rigid nature of these laws reflects a deeper truth about the cosmos, as understood by ancient peoples, that certain principles are so fundamental to the structure of reality that they admit no exceptions, no modifications, no compromises. Just as physical laws like gravity operate consistently regardless of personal desires or special circumstances, the spiritual laws governing life and death maintain their requirements regardless of how tragic or unfair their consequences might seem. This cosmic rigidity serves a crucial purpose in maintaining the overall stability of existence. If the laws governing life and death could be bent or broken based on emotional appeals or special circumstances, the entire system would quickly collapse into chaos. Death would lose its meaning, life would lose its preciousness, and the carefully balanced relationship between different realms of existence would dissolve into destructive disorder. Hades understood this better than anyone, having witnessed countless souls who tried to argue for exceptions, who believed their situations were special enough to warrant different treatment, who could not accept that certain rules apply universally regardless of personal feelings or circumstances. His role as ruler of the Underworld required him to maintain these principles, even when doing so caused him personal pain, even when his own heart was moved by the music of love and loss. The terms he offered Orpheus represented the absolute limit of what was possible within the cosmic framework, a single chance for resurrection, conditional upon perfect adherence to the requirements necessary to make such resurrection successful. There could be no negotiation, no modification of terms, no allowance for human weakness or understandable errors. This inflexibility might seem cruel from a mortal perspective, but from the standpoint of cosmic order, it represents the highest form of justice, the equal application of universal principles to all beings regardless of their status, power, or personal circumstances. Even the son of Apollo, gifted with divine music and capable of moving the hearts of gods, remained subject to the same fundamental laws that governed every other soul attempting to transition between realms. But perhaps the most profound aspect of these underworld laws is what they reveal about the nature of death itself, as understood in ancient cosmology. Death was not viewed as the ultimate enemy to be conquered or the final evil to be overcome, but rather as a necessary and integral part of a larger system that included life, growth, transformation, and renewal. The rules governing the underworld were designed not to punish the living or make death more terrible than necessary, but rather to ensure that each realm maintained its proper function within the greater cosmic order. Death served essential purposes. It provided rest for those who had completed their earthly journeys. It made way for new life to emerge and flourish. It offered opportunities for spiritual transformation and growth that were not available in the physical world. To allow easy transit back and forth between life and death would undermine these essential functions, making both realms less effective at serving their cosmic purposes. The living world needed the finality of death to give weight and meaning to mortal choices, while the realm of the dead needed its separateness to provide the unique forms of peace and transformation that could only exist beyond the pressures and limitations of physical existence. The prohibition against looking back thus served not only the technical requirements of the resurrection spell, but also the deeper requirement of maintaining proper relationship between the realms. Even in the unprecedented case of allowing a return from death, the journey had to be structured in a way that reinforced rather than undermined the fundamental separateness and distinct purposes of each realm. By requiring forward focus and prohibiting backward glances, the rules ensured that anyone successfully making the transition would be fully committed to life rather than remaining partially attached to death. This prevented the kind of liminal existence that would be unsatisfying for the individual and potentially disruptive to the cosmic order as a whole. What emerges from understanding these cosmic laws is a picture of existence as an interconnected system where every part depends upon every other part functioning properly. The tragic failure of Orpheus and Eurydice was not the result of divine caprice or cosmic cruelty, but rather the inevitable consequence of attempting to operate outside the fundamental principles that maintain the stability and meaning of the entire system. Their story becomes, in this light, not just a tale of personal loss, but an illustration of how individual desires, however noble and understandable, must sometimes yield to larger requirements that transcend personal happiness. The backward glance represents the eternal human struggle between what we want and what the universe requires, between our individual needs and the greater good that sometimes demands sacrifice from particular persons for the benefit of the whole. Yet even within this cosmic framework, there is profound meaning in Orpheus's attempt. By pushing against the boundaries of what was possible, by refusing to accept loss without a fight, by demonstrating love so complete that it was willing to risk everything for the beloved's well-being, he added something valuable to the total sum of existence. His failure was necessary to maintain cosmic order, but his attempt was necessary to demonstrate the heights of which mortal love is capable. The universe needed both his reaching toward the impossible and his ultimate inability to achieve it, both his transcendent devotion and his very human limitations. The laws of the Underworld, rigid as they were, created the framework within which such transcendent love could be both expressed and tested. Without the absolute nature of the conditions, without the irreversible consequences of failure, Orpheus's love could never have been revealed in its full intensity and beauty. In this sense, the cosmic laws that ultimately defeated him were also what made his love legendary, what transformed his personal tragedy into universal inspiration. The rules that prevented his success were the same rules that gave his attempt its profound meaning and lasting impact. But the influence of Orpheus's story extends far beyond its immediate mythological context. His journey to the underworld and the profound love that motivated it became the foundation for an entire religious and philosophical movement that would reshape ancient Greek thought and provide answers to some of humanity's deepest questions about the nature of existence and the possibility of life beyond death. The religion that emerged from his story, known as Orphism, represented one of the most sophisticated and influential mystery traditions of the ancient world, offering initiates not just stories and rituals, but a complete cosmology and a practical path towards spiritual transformation and ultimate salvation. You must understand that in the ancient Greek world, traditional religion focused primarily on maintaining proper relationships with the gods to ensure success in this life, with relatively little attention paid to what might happen after death. The official mythology offered various conflicting accounts of the afterlife, most of them depicting it as a shadowy, diminished existence that was at best a pale reflection of mortal life, and at worst a realm of punishment and suffering. For most Greeks, death represented the end of everything that made life meaningful, the end of relationships, achievements, pleasures, and even personal identity. The dead were thought to become mere shadows of their former selves, retaining perhaps some minimal consciousness, but lacking the vitality, purpose, and capacity for growth that defined meaningful existence. But Orpheus's story offered something radically different, proof that the boundary between life and death was not absolute, that love could transcend mortality, that divine music could open doors that had seemed permanently sealed. More importantly, his journey suggested that death itself might not be the ending it appeared to be, but rather a transition to a different kind of existence, one that might even offer opportunities unavailable in mortal life. The religious movement that grew up around these ideas attracted followers who were dissatisfied with traditional answers to life's ultimate questions, people who yearned for something more than the conventional Greek understanding of fate and mortality. Orphism offered them a comprehensive alternative worldview, one that promised not just hope for the afterlife, but practical means for achieving spiritual transformation in this life. At the heart of Orphic theology was the concept of the immortal soul, an idea that was revolutionary in its implications for how humans understood themselves and their place in the cosmos. According to Orphic teaching, each person possessed an eternal divine essence that was temporarily incarnated in physical form but would continue to exist long after the death of the body. This divine soul was understood to be literally a fragment of divinity itself, a spark of the same cosmic fire that animated the gods and maintained the order of the universe. This meant that every human being was, in essence, a god in exile, a divine entity temporarily trapped in mortal form but destined for eventual return to its true spiritual home. But the Orphics taught that this return to divinity was not automatic or guaranteed. The soul's journey after death was understood to be fraught with challenges and opportunities, requiring wisdom, preparation, and purification to navigate successfully. Those who lived without awareness of their divine nature or preparation for death's transition would find themselves lost in the underworld's labyrinthine passages, unable to achieve their true destiny. Central to Orphic cosmology was the doctrine of metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls through multiple incarnations. According to this teaching, the divine soul experienced many lifetimes in various forms, each incarnation offering opportunities for learning, purification, and spiritual growth that would gradually prepare it for eventual return to full divine consciousness. This cycle of reincarnation was not viewed as punishment, but rather as a kind of cosmic education system designed to help souls develop the wisdom and purity necessary for divine existence. Each lifetime presented specific lessons and challenges, and how well the soul learned from these experiences determined the nature of its subsequent incarnations. But metempsychosis was not an endless cycle. It had a definite goal and a possible endpoint. Through proper spiritual development across multiple lifetimes, a soul could eventually achieve sufficient purification to break free from the cycle of incarnation and return to its divine source. This ultimate achievement, known as apotheosis or deification, represented the highest possible destiny for any conscious being. The Orphics developed elaborate maps of the afterlife geography, describing in detail the various regions through which souls must pass after death and the challenges they would encounter in each location. These were not merely imaginative descriptions, but practical guides intended to help initiates navigate the post-mortem journey successfully. According to Orphic teaching, the soul immediately after death found itself in a complex realm with multiple paths and destinations. Choosing the correct path required both knowledge of the underworld's geography and the spiritual development necessary to resist the various temptations and distractions that would lead souls astray. One of the most important elements of Orphic afterlife geography was the description of two springs encountered by souls soon after death, the spring of memory and the spring of forgetfulness. Souls who drank from the spring of forgetfulness would lose all memory of their divine nature and previous incarnations, making them vulnerable to being trapped in cycles of unconscious reincarnation. But souls who had been properly prepared through Orphic initiation would know to seek out the spring of memory instead. Drinking from this source would preserve their spiritual knowledge and self-awareness, enabling them to navigate the underworld consciously and work toward eventual liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. The Orphic mysteries provided initiates with detailed instructions for making these crucial choices, including specific passwords, formulaic phrases, and symbolic gestures that would help them identify the correct paths and communicate with the various guardians and judges they would encounter in the afterlife. But Orphism was not merely concerned with preparing for death. It also offered a comprehensive program for spiritual development during life. The religion taught that the divine soul could begin to awaken to its true nature even while incarnated in physical form, and that such awakening would not only improve the current lifetime but also contribute to the soul's long-term progress toward ultimate liberation. Orphic spiritual practices included various forms of purification designed to cleanse the soul of the accumulated pollution that resulted from involvement with physical existence. These purifications were both ritual and ethical. Initiates were expected to follow strict dietary laws, maintain sexual purity, practice honesty and compassion in all relationships, and dedicate regular time to contemplation and spiritual study. The dietary restrictions were particularly important, as Orphics believed that consuming animal flesh bound the soul more tightly to physical existence and made spiritual advancement more difficult. Many initiates became vegetarians, viewing this choice as both an ethical commitment to non-violence and a practical means of maintaining spiritual clarity. Sexual purity was also emphasized, though this was understood not as a rejection of sexuality per se, but rather as a recognition that sexual energy was a powerful spiritual force that needed to be channeled appropriately. Some Orphic sects practiced complete celibacy, while others permitted sexual activity within marriage but discouraged casual or indiscriminate sexual expression. But perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Orphic practice was its emphasis on music and poetry as spiritual disciplines. Following the example of Orpheus himself, initiates were taught that properly performed music and correctly recited sacred texts could induce states of consciousness that provided direct contact with divine reality. These were not merely aesthetic or entertainment activities, but forms of active spiritual practice understood to have transformative power over both the performer and the audience. Sacred songs and poems were believed to carry within them the same divine harmonies that Orpheus had used to charm the rulers of the Underworld, and regular engagement with these harmonies could gradually attune the human soul to its own divine nature. The Orphic mysteries also included elaborate initiation ceremonies that were understood to effect actual transformation in the spiritual condition of participants. These rituals were kept strictly secret from non-initiates, but we know they involved symbolic death and rebirth experiences, encounters with divine figures, and the revelation of sacred knowledge that was believed to be necessary for successful navigation of the afterlife. Participation in these mysteries was thought to guarantee that the initiate's soul would be recognized by the Underworld guardians as one who belonged to the divine realm rather than the ordinary mortal world. This recognition would provide protection during the post-mortem journey and ensure access to the more blessed regions of the afterlife reserved for those who had achieved spiritual development during their incarnated existence. The influence of Orphism on ancient Greek culture was profound and far-reaching. Its ideas about the immortality of the soul, the possibility of spiritual purification, and the importance of ethical living as preparation for the afterlife provided alternatives to the fatalistic worldview that characterized much of traditional Greek religion. Many of the greatest Greek philosophers, including Plato, were deeply influenced by Orphic ideas and incorporated them into their own philosophical systems. Plato's famous allegory of the cave, his discussions of the soul's immortality, and his emphasis on philosophical contemplation as a form of spiritual purification all show clear influences from Orphic teaching. The Orphic emphasis on personal responsibility for one's spiritual development also contributed to the growing individualization of religious experience in the ancient world. Rather than depending entirely on the favor of the gods or the mediation of priests, Orphic initiates were taught that they could take direct action to influence their spiritual destiny through proper living and ritual practice. This democratization of spiritual opportunity was revolutionary in its implications. It suggested that divine status was not reserved exclusively for heroes and demigods, but was potentially available to anyone willing to undertake the necessary preparation and purification. Every human being carried within themselves the potential for transcendence, regardless of their social status, family background, or material circumstances. The Orphic mysteries thus offered hope to people who felt excluded from or dissatisfied with conventional religious options. Slaves, women, foreigners, and others who had limited access to traditional religious roles could find in Orphism a path to spiritual development that depended on personal commitment rather than external privileges. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact of Orphism was its influence on the development of Christianity and other mystery religions that would eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world. Many of the central Christian ideas, including the immortality of the soul, the possibility of salvation through proper spiritual preparation, the importance of moral purification, and the promise of blessed afterlife for the spiritually developed, have clear precedents in Orphic teaching. The figure of Orpheus himself became a symbol that early Christians could appreciate and even identify with. Like Jesus, he was a divine figure who had descended into the realm of the dead and returned with knowledge that could offer salvation to those who followed his example. His music, like Christ's teachings, had the power to transform hearts and open doors that had seemed permanently sealed. Some early Christian art actually depicts Christ as Orpheus, showing him with a lyre surrounded by peaceful animals, emphasizing the continuity between the pagan mystery religions and the new Christian faith. This syncretistic imagery suggests that many converts to Christianity understood their new religion not as a complete break from the past, but as the fulfillment of spiritual longings that had been partially satisfied by earlier traditions like Orphism. The Orphic emphasis on secret knowledge revealed to initiates also influenced the development of various Gnostic movements within early Christianity, which taught that salvation depended on receiving hidden wisdom that was not available to ordinary believers. These Gnostic groups often incorporated elaborate cosmologies and afterlife geographies that bore striking resemblances to those found in Orphic texts. What makes the historical influence of Orphism particularly remarkable is how it demonstrates the power of mythological narrative to generate real-world religious and philosophical movements. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice was just a tale, a piece of imaginative literature that might have remained merely entertaining without any deeper significance. But something about this particular story resonated so deeply with human spiritual yearnings that it became the foundation for an entire way of understanding existence and humanity's place within it. The mythological narrative provided a framework for addressing the most fundamental questions that conscious beings face. What happens after death? Is there meaning beyond mortal existence? Can love transcend the apparent finality of physical dissolution? The religion that grew from Orpheus's story offered answers to these questions that were both intellectually sophisticated and emotionally satisfying. It provided a cosmology that made sense of human experience while also offering practical means for spiritual development and ultimate transcendence. Moreover, Orphism demonstrated that religious inspiration could come from sources other than divine revelation or priestly authority. The power of artistic creation, the depth of human love, the willingness to risk everything for transcendent values. These became recognized as legitimate foundations for spiritual understanding and religious commitment. In this sense, Orpheus's story validates the importance of artists, musicians, poets, and all creative individuals as potential sources of spiritual wisdom. It suggests that the same impulses that drive artistic creation can also drive religious innovation, that the capacity to imagine alternative possibilities is itself a form of spiritual gift that can benefit entire communities. The lasting influence of Orphism reminds us that mythology is never merely entertainment, but rather one of the primary means through which human beings explore and express their deepest concerns about existence and meaning. Stories that seem to be about gods and heroes and impossible adventures are actually about us, about our hopes and fears, our capacity for transcendence, our need for connection with something greater than our individual selves. The religion that emerged from the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice thus represents something profound about human nature itself, our refusal to accept that death is the final word, our insistence that love and beauty and artistic creation must have significance beyond their temporary material expressions, our willingness to base our understanding of ultimate reality on the highest and most transcendent experiences available to consciousness. Which aspect of the Orphic vision speaks most powerfully to your own spiritual yearnings? The promise of personal immortality, the possibility of gradual purification across multiple lifetimes, or the idea that artistic beauty can serve as a bridge to divine reality? For me, it has to be the last of these, the recognition that creative expression can be a form of spiritual practice that actually changes both the artist and the audience. But as we consider the profound influence that Orpheus's story had on ancient religious thought, we must also examine another aspect of the tale that has troubled readers and interpreters for centuries: the relative silence and passivity of Eurydice herself throughout most of the narrative. In a story that claims to be about perfect love between two people, one of those people remains almost completely voiceless, her thoughts and feelings largely unexplored, her agency in her own fate severely limited. This pattern of feminine silence in the face of masculine action raises important questions about how the story functions, not just as individual biography, but as a reflection of broader cultural attitudes toward women, love, and the nature of heroism itself. You must notice, as you review the tale we have just experienced together, how little Eurydice actually speaks or acts independently. She appears first as an object of pursuit, chasing butterflies in a meadow until her path intersects with Orpheus's location. Their courtship, while mutually enthusiastic, is described primarily from his perspective, focusing on his emotional responses to her rather than her inner experience of falling in love. Even their wedding, presented as the celebration of their union, becomes primarily a showcase for the gifts and blessings bestowed upon Orpheus by his divine relatives and friends. Eurydice receives beautiful presents and kind words, but the ceremony itself seems designed more to honor the bridegroom than to celebrate the bride as an equally important participant in the marriage. When tragedy strikes in that fatal meadow, Eurydice becomes literally voiceless, first unconscious from the snakebite, then dead, then a silent shade in the underworld. During Orpheus's famous plea before Hades and Persephone, she stands nearby but says nothing. Her thoughts about his request, her feelings about the possibility of return to life, her own desires regarding her fate, none of these are explored or even acknowledged. The journey back toward the surface world continues this pattern of silence. Eurydice follows behind, presumably grateful for rescue, but unable to express that gratitude or offer comfort to Orpheus during his struggles with doubt and fear. She exists in the story at this point primarily as an object of his quest, rather than as a subject with her own agency and perspective. Even at the moment of the backward glance, her response is described entirely in terms of how it affects Orpheus. She smiles with forgiveness and understanding, but we are given no access to her inner experience of once again losing the chance for life, of being condemned to return to the underworld because of her husband's inability to maintain faith for just a few more steps. This pattern of feminine silence becomes even more pronounced when we compare Eurydice's role in the story to that of other female characters who appear more briefly but make much stronger impressions. Persephone, despite being a relatively minor character in terms of screen time, emerges as a fully realized person with clear motivations, emotional depth, and significant influence on the story's outcome. Persephone's tears during Orpheus's performance are not merely aesthetic responses to beautiful music, but expressions of her own experience of loss and separation, her own understanding of what it means to be torn away from everything familiar and forced to adapt to an alien realm. Her intervention on behalf of the lovers comes from her personal knowledge of both love and loss, making her advocacy meaningful and specific rather than generic. Similarly, the muses who appear at Orpheus's wedding, Artemis who attends his concerts, even the Maenads who ultimately kill him. All of these female figures display more agency, more clearly defined personalities, more impact on the narrative than Eurydice herself despite her central importance to the plot. This contrast highlights what has become one of the most problematic aspects of the story for modern readers. How can we take seriously a tale that claims to celebrate perfect love while rendering one of the lovers almost completely invisible as an independent person? What does it mean that the woman whose supposed perfection motivates the entire narrative remains largely undefined throughout the story? One way to understand this apparent contradiction is to recognize that Eurydice functions in the story less as a realistic character than as a symbol, a representation of something abstract that cannot be directly portrayed but can only be approached through metaphor and suggestion. From this perspective, her silence and passivity are not flaws in the storytelling, but rather essential features of what she represents. Eurydice embodies the concept of loss itself, not just the loss of a particular person, but the universal human experience of losing things we cherish, of having meaning and beauty torn away from us by forces beyond our control. Loss, by its very nature, cannot speak for itself because it is defined by absence rather than presence, by what is no longer there rather than by what remains. To give Eurydice too much personality, too much agency, too much individual reality would be to diminish her symbolic power as a representation of all the precious things that slip away from us, despite our desperate efforts to hold on to them. Her silence allows her to stand for every beloved person who has died too soon, every dream that has been cut short, every happiness that has proven too fragile to survive contact with reality. From this symbolic perspective, Orpheus's quest becomes not just the story of one man trying to rescue his particular wife, but a universal allegory about humanity's struggle to recover what has been lost, to undo what cannot be undone, to restore what time and change and death have taken away from us. Eurydice's silence allows readers to project their own experiences of loss onto her figure, making her a vessel for whatever forms of grief and longing they carry in their own hearts. If she spoke too much or revealed too much of her specific personality, she would become merely one person's story rather than a representation of everyone's experience with loss and the desperate hope for recovery. This interpretation explains why attempts to retell the story with a more active, vocal Eurydice often feel unsatisfying or even false to the original's emotional impact. When modern adaptations give her extensive dialogue, detailed personality traits, or independent agency in her fate, they sometimes lose the mythic power that comes from her function as a symbol of loss itself. But there is another, more troubling way to understand Eurydice's silence as a reflection of cultural attitudes that viewed women primarily as objects of male attention rather than as subjects with their own inner lives and autonomous desires. From this perspective, her passivity is not a sophisticated symbolic choice, but rather an unconscious expression of a worldview that could not imagine women as fully realized individuals worthy of detailed characterization. This interpretation is supported by the broader patterns we see throughout Greek mythology, where female characters often exist primarily to motivate male heroes, to provide obstacles for male protagonists to overcome, or to represent abstract concepts rather than individual human experiences. Even when women in these stories are powerful, they are often portrayed as dangerous, seductive, or otherwise threatening to male autonomy and achievement. The fact that Eurydice is consistently portrayed as passive and supportive, never challenging or complicating Orpheus's decisions, fits into this pattern of idealizing women who make no demands on male attention except the demand to be rescued or protected. She represents a fantasy of feminine perfection that requires no negotiation, no compromise, no acknowledgement of competing needs or independent desires. From this perspective, Orpheus's love for Eurydice becomes less admirable because it appears to be love for someone who exists primarily to reflect his own emotional needs rather than for a complete person with her own complex inner life. His willingness to risk everything for her return could be seen as narcissistic rather than genuinely caring, motivated by his inability to accept the loss of something he viewed as an extension of himself rather than by concern for her well-being as an independent individual. This reading of the story connects it to a long tradition of literary and mythological works that present romantic love as essentially selfish, focused more on the lover's need to possess the beloved than on genuine care for the beloved's autonomous flourishing. The backward glance becomes not a tragic mistake born of too much love, but the inevitable result of a relationship based on possession rather than partnership. But there is yet a third way to understand Eurydice's silence, one that grants her more agency and dignity while still acknowledging the cultural constraints within which the story was constructed. This interpretation suggests that her apparent passivity actually represents a form of wisdom and spiritual development that surpasses even Orpheus's extraordinary gifts. According to this reading, Eurydice's silence during the Underworld scenes reflects her deep understanding of what death has taught her about the nature of existence and the limitations of earthly attachments. Having experienced the transition from life to death, having gained knowledge that no living person possesses, she has achieved a form of enlightenment that makes ordinary human concerns seem less urgent and compelling. Her lack of enthusiasm for returning to life is not passivity, but rather the response of someone who has discovered that death offers its own forms of peace and understanding that would be lost in a return to mortal existence. Her quiet acceptance of the rules governing her potential resurrection reflects not helplessness, but recognition that some cosmic principles are too important to be violated even for love. From this perspective, her forgiveness of Orpheus's backward glance becomes not mere feminine compliance, but the response of someone who understands that his failure was inevitable and perhaps even necessary. She has achieved sufficient spiritual development to see their tragedy in cosmic terms rather than merely personal ones, recognizing that their story serves purposes beyond their individual happiness. This interpretation makes Eurydice the wiser of the two lovers, the one who has learned to accept reality rather than fighting against it, the one who has transcended ordinary human attachments in favor of deeper spiritual understanding. Her silence becomes a sign of enlightenment rather than oppression, a choice to speak only when speech serves essential purposes rather than merely expressing personal desires. Such a reading aligns with certain mystical traditions that view silence as a higher form of communication than speech, a way of expressing truths too profound for ordinary language. Eurydice's wordlessness becomes a form of teaching, demonstrating through example the kind of acceptance and transcendence that Orpheus has not yet achieved. This interpretation also explains why their reunion in death is portrayed as completely satisfying for both of them. By the time Orpheus dies and joins Eurydice in the afterlife, he too has gained the wisdom that comes from loss and suffering, enabling him to love her with the same enlightened detachment that she has already achieved. But even this more charitable reading of Eurydice's silence raises questions about the cultural assumptions embedded in the story. Why should wisdom and spiritual development be expressed through silence rather than speech? Why should enlightenment require the abandonment of agency rather than its enhancement? Why should the feminine principle be associated with passive acceptance while masculine energy is linked to active striving? These questions connect the story of Orpheus and Eurydice to broader patterns in world mythology where women who have gained spiritual wisdom or supernatural knowledge are often portrayed as mysterious, silent, or otherwise removed from ordinary human communication. The Sibyl who speaks only in riddles, the witch who lives alone in the forest, the goddess who appears in visions but cannot be directly approached, all represent variations on the theme of feminine wisdom that exists outside normal social discourse. This pattern suggests deep cultural ambivalence about female knowledge and authority. On one hand, women are recognized as having access to forms of understanding unavailable to men: intuition, connection to natural cycles, awareness of life and death, mysteries that come from their role in childbearing. On the other hand, this knowledge is portrayed as somehow incompatible with normal social participation, requiring withdrawal from ordinary human relationships and communication. Eurydice fits into this pattern perfectly. Her experience of death has given her knowledge that surpasses even Orpheus's divine gifts, but this knowledge can only be expressed through silence, acceptance, and withdrawal from active participation in her own fate. She becomes wise by becoming passive, achieving understanding by abandoning agency. Contemporary readers may find this trade-off unsatisfying, preferring stories where wisdom enhances rather than diminishes a character's ability to act effectively in the world. We want to see Eurydice use her death-gained knowledge actively, speaking up to guide Orpheus during their escape attempt, or making deliberate choices about whether to return to life based on her superior understanding of both realms. But such modernization of the story risks losing touch with the original cultural context that gave it meaning and power for ancient audiences. The mythological Eurydice emerges from a world where feminine wisdom was understood to operate according to different principles than masculine knowledge, where silence could be more powerful than speech, where acceptance could be more transformative than resistance. To fully appreciate the story, we may need to temporarily set aside our contemporary assumptions about agency and empowerment, allowing ourselves to encounter a different model of how wisdom and love might operate. This doesn't require us to accept ancient gender roles as permanently valid, but it does ask us to consider whether there might be forms of power and understanding that our culture has difficulty recognizing or valuing. Perhaps Eurydice's silence speaks to something that we have lost in our emphasis on verbal articulation and active agency, the power of presence itself, the impact of simply being authentically oneself without needing to explain or justify or convince. In a world where so much communication is strategic, manipulative, or self-promotional, there might be profound meaning in a love that requires no words, no arguments, no campaigns for attention. Her acceptance of cosmic rules that cannot be changed might represent not passive victimhood, but mature wisdom about which battles are worth fighting and which outcomes must be embraced with grace. In our culture of endless resistance and constant striving for control, her example might offer a different model of how to respond to circumstances beyond our ability to alter. These possibilities don't resolve all the problematic aspects of Eurydice's portrayal, but they do suggest that her silence might carry meanings beyond mere cultural limitation or artistic oversight. She remains a complex figure whose significance continues to evolve as different generations bring their own concerns and insights to her story. What's certain is that any complete understanding of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth must grapple with the question of what her silence represents and what her apparent passivity reveals about the story's deepest assumptions regarding love, wisdom, and the relationship between individual agency and cosmic order. Whether we see her as a symbol of loss, a victim of cultural limitation, an enlightened being who has transcended ordinary concerns, or some combination of all three, Eurydice remains one of the most hauntingly ambiguous figures in all of mythology, present at the story's center yet absent from its action, essential to its meaning yet largely voiceless in its telling. Her enduring mystery ensures that each generation will continue to find new meanings in her silence, new ways to understand what she represents about the nature of love, loss, and the eternal human quest for connection that transcends even death itself. As our journey through the deeper meanings of this ancient tale draws to its close, you can see how a simple story of love and loss opens into vast territories of human experience and understanding. From the power of music to transform reality, through the psychological complexities of doubt and faith, into the cosmic laws that govern existence itself, and finally to the cultural and spiritual movements that grew from one couple's tragedy. Every aspect of the myth reveals new layers of significance. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice endures not because it provides easy answers to life's hardest questions, but because it captures something essential about what it means to be human in a universe where love and loss, hope and despair, transcendence and limitation exist in constant tension with each other. Their tale reminds us that our greatest strengths can become our greatest weaknesses, that our most profound loves can lead to our most devastating failures, that the very qualities that make us capable of transcendent beauty also make us vulnerable to tragic mistakes. Yet it also suggests that such failures and mistakes are not the final word, that love which reaches toward the impossible leaves traces in the world that inspire others long after the lovers themselves have passed beyond the reach of ordinary sight. Whether you encounter this story as mythology or psychology, as spiritual teaching or cultural artifact, as entertainment or profound truth, it offers the gift that all great narratives provide: the opportunity to see your own experiences reflected and illuminated by the experiences of others, to feel less alone with your own struggles and aspirations, to recognize that the challenges you face are part of the universal human condition. In Orpheus's music, you might recognize your own creative gifts and the responsibility that comes with them. In his love for Eurydice, you might see reflections of your own capacity for devotion that transcends reason and self-protection. In his journey to the underworld, you might find echoes of your own willingness to risk everything for what you hold most dear. In Eurydice's grace and forgiveness, you might discover models for how to respond to disappointment and loss with dignity rather than bitterness. In her silence, you might find recognition of the limits of language to capture certain experiences. In her ultimate reunion with Orpheus beyond death, you might glimpse hope that love which is genuine creates bonds that cannot be permanently severed by any external force. Most of all, their story offers the comfort of knowing that others have faced the same fundamental challenges that you face, that the questions which keep you awake at night are questions that conscious beings have been wrestling with for as long as consciousness has existed. In sharing their story, we participate in the ancient human practice of using narrative to make sense of existence, to find meaning in suffering, to discover hope in the midst of loss. The mythological realm where Orpheus and Eurydice found their eternal happiness together is not just a fantasy about the afterlife, but a symbol of the timeless space where all profound love stories continue to exist. Every time their tale is told, every time someone finds inspiration in their devotion or comfort in their reunion, that mythical realm becomes a little more real, a little more accessible to those who need its healing presence. And so, dreamers, as you prepare to let sleep carry you toward your own dreams and visions, remember that the love between Orpheus and Eurydice lives on not just in the realm beyond death, but in the realm beyond time. The eternal present where all beauty, all truth, all genuine connection continues to exist regardless of the changes and chances of mortal existence. Let their music carry you gently toward rest, secure in the knowledge that love, which is real, never truly ends but only transforms, finding new ways to express itself, new voices to sing its song, new hearts to inspire with its endless capacity for hope, healing, and transcendent joy. Good night, and may your own love stories prove worthy of the songs that echo through eternity.